everyone, and welcome back from the holidays. Hope you guys enjoyed it with your friends. We got to watch a little football, got a little time off. We got to talk about it last week, and now we're on to recruiting. So with the early signing day, now in December, we've got something else exciting to talk about after the bowl game. We'll talk about wins and losses in the recruiting game and the transfer portal with the NIL program. As always, welcome to the Night at One's podcast. This is episode number 19. We're almost at 20. We are the only podcast that features a former UCF national champion, a former UCF radio host, and several podcasters shooting the breeze talking UCF sports. But there's more this week. Not only do you have all of those great people joining us, but the king of the UCF internet weasels is with us this week, Brandon Helwig, a good friend of mine, a great person. He's known Trey Neal when he was a player. He knew Ben Stout. And this guy literally is the encyclopedia on UCF sports. Always make sure, I recommend this to all of our listeners, make sure you're checking out ucfsports.com. His content is amazing, and he's always got the scoops because he's got the relationships. And without further ado, I'm going to welcome Brandon to the stage. Brandon Helwig, my good friend, a great journalist, and all-around good human being. Welcome to the show, and thank you for agreeing to join us.
Well, awesome. Thank you for having me, Roger. I know we've talked many a time on various shows when I've done something, when you were on the radio with Nightline, but I think this is my debut appearance on the Night of One, so I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Hey, it's my pleasure, and hopefully it's one of many. I mean, we're lucky to have you. You've got national guys you're talking to. You're talking to the 365 guys. You are everywhere, especially when we were on the cusp of joining the Big 12, and you represent us so well, like literally couldn't have a better ambassador.
Well, I thank you for the kind words, Roger. I mean, there's always something going on. I know we're going to talk a lot, today about recruiting and transfer portal and the season. It just never stops. December was really a crazy month when you go back and look at it.
Yeah, you don't ever get any time off. So I'm gonna bring in the guys real quick, and we'll get right to it because there's a lot to talk about. I mean, it's an exciting time, at least for me as an older Knight, to be a UCF Knight, to see the kind of recruiting class that we brought in this year. So next to the stage, we'll bring another former Knight who was recruited that you know very well, that I know very well, and the listeners certainly do because he yells at clouds. Trey Neal, welcome back to the show.
What's up? What's up? How we doing?
We're doing better. Are you yelling at clouds this week, or are you celebrating with a rain dance? What's going on? I
told you, New Year, season's over. We're looking to 2024. It's only positivity for me until we get to I think our first game is the last day of August. So once we get around that camp season, I'll start getting back into my football mode of, getting ready to start yelling some stuff. So
all right. We'll take the positivity. We'll feed off of it throughout the summer. Yeah. Another former UCF recruit that predated Trey Neal, but in a different sport, but just as talented, Ben Stout, and a little bit taller. Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
I'll take the taller thing, but I don't know if I was more talented than Trey Neal. But I'll appreciate the compliment. Being on the same level there.
I can't play basketball if my life depends on it.
Yeah. Good to be on with you guys. I appreciate you having me.
So the twin towers, both virtual and literal, of UCF Sports, join us on the show tonight. And last but not least, but always last, Josh Lazar is back from his vacation throughout the state of Georgia. Welcome back, my friend.
Going 1-0 every day. How you doing today?
Good. What did you? We saw the Gwinnett County plate. Did you actually stop in Gwinnett County, or were you just putting it over on us?
Putting it over. I was going the back roads of, was it 85, I believe, at that point, because there was a huge, it's Atlanta traffic, right?
Yeah, man.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. So I'm trying to find these back roads to get out of this traffic, try to get at, we were over in the Rock City side of Georgia. If for those of you who have traveled around Georgia, going to Chattanooga pretty much every day or two. So now I just saw it on a plate while I was driving in the sides of Georgia rather than up the interstate. I'm like,
so I do have to ask you, did you stop by a local McDonald's and drop off a bag at a high school? Because we recruit Atlanta area pretty heavily. Did you do what you needed to do for the Kingdom this week?
Yeah, yes, on McDonald's, but not for that reason, only for Squishmallows for my daughter. So that was I had a bag, but it wasn't paying off a recruit.
All right. Well, Squishmallows. We're going with that. And by the way, for the listeners, I do have a green screen. I tried to use it. It'll be fixed next week. All right. So with all that being said,
green screen.
All right. With all that being said, let's go ahead and let's
stop boring Brandon.
Hey, listen. Brandon is always on point. He's getting a scoop as we speak. This is his scoop face. So don't you say that.
He's posting in the dungeon while we're setting up for this. It's amazing. He's the man.
Well, he is the man, as I said, and we're excited to have him. And we're going to allow him to have a little bit of center stage here because he really has all the juice. And I'm super excited to hear about, our new class and what your thoughts are, how it, translates or compares to previous classes. And number three, now that you're big time P5 sports journalist, how does do you notice any differences in recruiting and the recruiting game as you kind of move along here?
No, it's I think this was a recruiting class in a way is to be expected. UCF moving up to the Big 12. Obviously stepping up their NIL game in the last year as well with the Kingdom. I mean, it's really just been, this past calendar year, 2023, when, UCF's Kingdom kind of took off. SJ Tui left, the football office and kind of manned up the fundraising and management of the Kingdom and all those things combined. I mean, let's be realistic. I mean, that's what you need to recruit these days. If you want to recruit at a high level, you want to recruit guys, 4-star, 5-star caliber players. I mean, that's a big component of it. Do you have, a good NIL program? And so that was the biggest thing too. That kind of gets overlooked other than going to the Big 12 that UCF now has, everything can be better. Every, you can recruit better players. You obviously need to get more donations to the Kingdom, but that was a big development over the past year. So yeah, I mean, UCF, a top 30 recruiting class. I mean, there was a time where, maybe it could have been top 25 if they would have closed on a couple more guys. I think if they would have signed the rankings are basically numbers based. And when you sign under 20 players, you're kind of penalized. So if they would have signed like 2 or 3 more players, just to sign them, some 3-star type guys, they might have had a top 25 recruiting class, but all in all, a great class. I was like 8 or 9 4-star players. The transfer portal class is continuing to evolve this month and going into January. But yeah, UCF, I believe, was second best recruiting class in the Big 12 outside of Texas Tech. So, I mean, I know the season didn't end the way we all wanted it to, but when you look at the future now with KJ Jefferson on board, just got to get some of those guys on defense for next year. That's obviously maybe the bigger need, but I think you have to be excited that UCF will be in position anyway, I think, to be, to competing at the top of the Big 12 next year.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned KJ. We'll get to him in a little bit because I am excited about KJ. It's interesting because I know a couple of the national guys too for 247 and some of those other ones and talking to them and what their vibe was on UCF's reputation in recruiting. I mean, it's one of the things that George O'Leary was chastised sometimes for turning coaches off to certain programs. Josh Heupel obviously had some issues with recruiting. We talked about that. That's been covered ad nauseum. And then, Scott Frost kind of got that back, but it feels like we've got someone, one, that's focused on Central Florida, which is awesome. 2, I think it might be a little bit easier for him to be able to do that now with and let's be real, it's not P5 anymore. It's not P4 anymore. It's P3, right? With the ACC is 10-year impending doom or whatever is happening with that. But, I think it's a little bit easier for Gus to be able to go out there and recruit Orlando and be successful, not have to go so far to reach to find those quote unquote diamonds in the rough, right? So being able to focus on Florida, being able to focus on Central Florida, we had a couple of good recruiters in the GOL years down in Miami. Kenneth Caldwell comes to mind, and a few other people. But it feels like we all knew it would be different, but it really is different for some of these guys now that they're staying home. Do you get a different vibe, even if you're talking about UCF, or excitement level, or those conversations that you're having, and what the reputation is? Because the national guys are saying it's way different. And if we had more NIL money, we'd be competing with the likes of Miami and Texas and those folks, because we got the recruiting chops.
I think the difference is that when Gus Malzahn came in, he knew what it takes to recruit at a high level. Like UCF for the first time has had a head coach that knows how, he understands how important it is to recruit. I mean, you could every coach will say it's important to recruit, but George O'Leary did not have the personality, as we all know, to kind of be considered a good recruiter.
You got Trey.
Who is your primary recruiter? Was it Sean Beckton?
Coach Beckton.
Coach Beckton.
And then Coach Callahan and Coach Key were like split my secondary.
Okay. So would you say, obviously George O'Leary is the head coach. I mean, it plays a role in your decision. I know you were considering Vanderbilt. Did you kind of commit to UCF? Was it because of Coach O'Leary, or in spite of Coach O'Leary? Was he kind of just the secondary? I mean, he was an important figure, but as far as the personal relationship, how prominent was Coach O'Leary in that?
So Coach O'Leary really, in my recruitment, he was more like, he kind of was a part of like the closer. He was like a closer.
Yeah.
Throughout those 2 years, it was heavy Coach Beck, heavy Coach Callahan, a little bit of Coach Key. And then when I came on my visit, it was like Coach O'Leary kind of took over a lot. And then like right around signing day, he came up to Atlanta to kind of talk to me, Mike Rogers, Chris Williams, and go through us. So he was kind of the closer, I'd say, as far as
Yeah. Well, the difference is that Gus Malzahn takes an active role through the entire process. Like we're going to talk about Jalen Hayward, one of the 4-star signees in this class. When Gus Malzahn got to UCF in February 2021 and he hired the staff, that was one of the first guys they offered. And he was only like a sophomore, coming off his freshman year, I think. And so, so it's just a coach that understands that recruiting, it begins earlier and earlier. Guys are going to commit earlier too, but you've got to start those relationships. You got to hire a coaching staff that it's important that they understand how to recruit. And that's the thing that I don't think UCF has ever really had. Like imagine, Coach Frost, did a decent job. Coach Heupel, I think that COVID year kind of killed him and everything with recruiting, but like Gus,
he did not have a good reputation in the local high schools.
Yeah. But Gus gets it. Gus gets it. He's got a personality that's set up to do it. And he's a former high school teacher. And, I think sometimes, he was dealing with, 15, 16, 17-year-old kids, for a few years coaching in Springdale, Arkansas as a high school coach, high school teacher. I think he's a history teacher, I think is what he taught. So he's got that background. I mean, he's kind of cultivated those skills through the years. I think that was important first and foremost. And I mean, he's kind of a celebrity head coach. I mean, you still hear it today. There was one of the transfers that committed, Dalen Dotson from UT Martin. I mean, he was talking to him like it was like when I was asking him about, committing to UCF, and he was like stars were in his eyes when he was talking about, I got to meet Gus Malzahn, and, I grew up as an Auburn fan, and I had a Cam Newton jersey, and I used to see Gus on TV, and now he's like recruiting me. I mean, they're like stars in their eyes. So, I mean, maybe we kind of overlook that sometimes. We're a little bit older, but these guys that are recruited now, 4, 5, 6 years ago, they were little kids, watching, Gus national championship game and all this stuff. So I think having that celebrity factor, I guess you can call that. I guess it's true.
It really is. I mean,
it matters. It helps.
A fixture in the SEC for a very long time. And he was the guy who beat Saban. You know what I mean?
And I can even talk to when they introduced Coach Shannon, and a lot of our team was from Miami, those guys were googly eyed oh my gosh, this is Randy Shannon. He coached the all those UM teams that they grew up loving. So I completely get it.
Yeah. So I mean, he's got.
So they didn't know he was lazy at the time, or that it was only in the second half that he coached. I mean, come on. A little jokey joke. We like to have fun, Brandon. It isn't all that serious. But go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean
I'm not sure where we're going with it, but I mean, all those factors, Gus Malzahn, Big 12, stepping up the NIL game over the past year, all those things kind of led to the class that we saw sign in mid-December.
Yeah, I think to your point, star power 100%. I mean, and I just think he's been in the Southeast for so long and recruiting in the Southeast for so long at that level that I think that has some cachet that he brought with him, especially in Georgia. Obviously Alabama, he recruited Florida, he recruited Central Florida. The high school coaches all knew who they were. And I feel like UCF needed to be competitive in recruiting, needed to have someone who could undo all the damage that was done in the past, because a lot of the Central Florida larger coaches, one, they treated our staff wrong at the beginning, but at the same time, we then also didn't treat them very well. And I think Gus is the perfect, mix of that for us in our recruiting. And really, that's part of why we brought him in. So the question now is, from a recruiting standpoint, he has said all along he wanted to build through high school. NIL kind of throws a lot of questions in that, and the transfer rule changes throws a lot of questions in that. Like, can you consistently keep a player, within your roster to, over a long enough period of time that you can get them to the field and build through high school while still giving them time to mature? So that's the other question that we haven't quite figured out yet with all these changes is, how does that affect our ability to utilize the, the high school pipeline? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I Gus has said that time and again that you have to build your roster through the high schools. And I mean, if you look at this past season, a handful of guys played. John Walker obviously played a huge role. Braden Marshall. But when you look at portal, UCF really didn't lose anybody. That was really the, honestly, that might've been the biggest win out of everything, when you talk about signing day and all that stuff. No, it was the fact that UCF didn't lose any of those younger players. They didn't really have any shocking portal, departures. I mean, the only notable one was Corey Thornton, going to Louisville. And I mean, the only reason he's got another year is because of the COVID year. I mean, he played 4 years at UCF. If he can, maybe get an opportunity in others. I mean, it's no different than Ryan O'Keefe and some of those guys. I mean, I don't, the fact, I don't think that's as big. I mean, it's a big loss because I think this was his best season, but I mean, it's, it wasn't devastating to lose him. But other than that, I mean, UCF didn't really lose any players they wanted from what I understand. I mean, that's when I mentioned the kingdom at the onset, that's an important part of it. That, a lot of people may not understand the full scope of it. Like when the season is over, they have to decide, we've got, I guess we can call it a budget or a salary cap. Whatever, you know what salary I'm getting cap,
at. That's what we've been calling it.
Whatever it is, like, and they understand that we've got to do what we can to keep these players at UCF and to prevent them from going in the portal and going to another school. So whether it's John Walker or, Braden Marshall or, some of these younger guys that just didn't have the opportunity to play this year because there was older players in front of them, you want to continue to build with those guys and develop them so they're ready to play this year. And the fact that UCF was able to hang on to those guys, I think says a lot. But yeah, but you mentioned, I don't know. I mean, we'll kind of see how it pans out because portal, no coaches don't feel like they can have rebuilding years anymore. Like they have to feel like they have to do everything they can to be as competitive as possible the next year. Like I was kind of wondering in the back of my mind, well, this is when I was thinking maybe middle of the season that, RJ Harvey, he's going to go to the NFL, right? Like he's not coming back, is he? Kobe and Javon, they're going to move on. I was kind of thinking that in my mind that was a likely possibility. And so, obviously UCF's losing John Rice Plumlee, and I'm just kind of thinking you're signing this recruiting class. I mean, why don't you just roll with one of these younger quarterbacks and just kind of, build through them? Maybe there'd be growing pains next year, but, I don't think coaches have the patience to do that anymore, especially with Gus. He had never gone through a losing season. I mean, it was a losing season this year because they lost the bowl game, but this is, I did kind of turn things around towards the end to get to that point, but I don't think he wants to go through that, that stretch in the middle of the season where you're losing. So yes, you got to do whatever it takes to fill holes and plug holes. And obviously we're seeing that with the transfer portal. So yeah, I don't know if it's lip service that you'd like to build in a perfect world, have your primary players be guys you recruited out of high school. But At the same time, when you recruit these guys out of the portal, you're recruiting them because you think they're going to come in at start. I mean, don't usually recruit guys out of the portal thinking, yeah, you're going to be like a third string linebacker, whatever. You're recruiting guys because they think you can play right away. And when you keep on bringing those guys in and they only have like 1 year left, what does that do with the younger guys on your roster? So I'll be interested to see kind of how this season unfolds. That's the one thing, at least on it wasn't a very good year for UCF defensively. I would have liked to see some of these younger guys get in there and play. I mean, there's reasons for it. I mean, I'm not a coach. There's reasons like a Caven Call, I guess, didn't get in there and stuff like that. But I would have liked to see maybe some of those guys develop that maybe we didn't see on the field this year.
Yeah. And people like Braden Marshall, you mentioned him. I mean, that guy's one of those guys when he's on the field. You mentioned Corey Thornton. Corey Thornton, had his best year, but you saw flashes with him. With Braden Marshall, I mean, he seems like he's just about ready. He was 4, 5, 6 games in when he got his first, time, and he just did really, really well. He had a nose for the football. He was one of the few that could open field tackle consistently. And some of these portal guys that we had were injured. So, I agree with you. I feel like knowing who those guys are, right, and being able to find them and being able to give them playing time at speed. Trey and I have talked about this all the time, the difference between high school and college as far as, the mental reps and being able to diagnose on offense and being able to choose what your responsibilities are. That's huge for freshman kids. And, the other part about this is, 13 of these kids are going to be on campus early, and that's going to be a huge deal for them to be able to produce for us early, because we did have a couple of linebackers that were injured, and, there's going to be a youth movement on the defense.
Yeah. And I think the defense is kind of to be determined in a way, because a lot of the portal additions that I think we're going to see in the next week are going to be guys on defense. Now that UCF has KJ Jefferson secured, obviously the goal is going to be linebacker. I mean, there's no one coming back that you feel confident that could start. I mean, I guess there's Cam Moore played a little bit, but you're losing Jason Johnson, Walter Yates. So those are some pretty big, I guess those are some shoes to fill. And,
well, does that let me ask you this question. Does KJ Jefferson hurt us, bringing someone like that in that we know is for us to win next year? Does that hurt us in our focus on being able to take a few more licks when it comes to, wow.
Yeah. Well, with KJ, I talking about because that's the one element.
Like now, the emphasis is to win. We got the big guy. We got.
And the thing I'm not sure which direction you're going, but this is something we've been debating on the Dungeon message board. Like, we don't know. Like, we were talking about salary cap and budget. Like, how expensive was KJ Jefferson? I mean, he's not coming for free. Matt Rule, the Nebraska head coach, said it. A month or so ago that the top quarterbacks in the portal, they want $1 million. I mean, that's what they're going to, and they're getting $1 million. Like Dylan Gabriel is going to Oregon for, I don't know what, but it's at least $1 million. I mean, that's been pretty established. So it's like, how much is KJ Jefferson getting? Is he getting, and there's the decisions you got to make, right? Like, do you, maybe there's a name, do you get a guy like KJ? Maybe he's more expensive. And if you take him, does that mean you can't afford maybe some guys on defense that, you'd like to get, or do you go cheap in one position? And I don't know. I mean, that's kind of the fascinating element of this stuff that doesn't really get talked about because it's not really public information, but every program in the country is doing that. Because other than somebody, I think Ole Miss has a ton of NIL money. They could just buy. They were paying. They were giving money to walk-ons. Like there was a kid that was going to walk on at UCF a couple of years ago, and he was getting some NIL deal to go to Ole Miss to be a preferred walk-on. It's absolutely insane. But I mean, unless you have that kind of money to deal with, you got to be smart with your money. You got to make proper decisions, and you got to hope it pans out.
Yeah, and it kind of forces you then there's two ways, like schools of thought there, and two ways that this could slice, like for me, right? So if I'm the coaches and I grab someone like KJ Jefferson, and it's a 1-year guy, we're spending a lot of money, right? That means win now, right? Yeah. That means you've got to win now. So all the other moves that you make as far as bringing in who you can to allow your defense to help you win now is different maybe than allowing some of these guys to develop and see the field. But at the same time, if you don't have the money to spend, do you go with a marginal portal player, or do you allow your freshmen to, start to grow into their own for the future?
Great question. I don't know. I mean, I guess we're going to find out. And we a lot of these things, we'll never really know. There's rumors and whispers of this guy might command this amount of money, or maybe this guy got this, but it's all speculation and rumor. I mean, that stuff's not public. And I always kind of wonder, like, what does that do to a locker room? Now that
we talk about that all the time.
Yeah,
too.
Like some guys, like, they're getting paid, and some guys maybe are getting paid and they're not performing. Like, they're not, maybe, don't feel like that investment was worth it. And there's guys who maybe aren't getting paid and are outperforming the guys. And how does that, what about the decision-making process when you're the coaching staff? I mean, it's no different when you got, sometimes it's like about minor league baseball, and they have, the guys, the draft picks that they have a lot of money invested in. Well, they're going to play. I mean, that's where the investment is. Maybe there's the guys that are making the minimum minor league, where, 30 round, draft pick. Maybe they're better than the guy who's kind of a bust in the first round, but they're going to give every opportunity to the guy they had the investment in. And you kind of feel like that. Is that the same way now? I mean, every head coach has, let's be real. It's not the collective deciding, this is the guy we're going after, and this is how much we're going to get him. All these collectives, are in lockstep with the head coaches. They're deciding who gets what, or how much should we offer this guy. It's all a collaborative effort. So the coaches know, they're involved in it. So, are you going to play guys because, you have, you're just thinking they're going to, turn it on, or maybe they've been disappointing, but they're going to, figure things out. You're going to keep on playing them because that's where your investment is. So that's interesting. That's the thing that I don't know, not going to hear a lot about, but I'm sure it happens some places that it leads to locker room issues.
So I can tell you this. Oh, sorry, Ben.
I was just going to ask a question on that point so you could elaborate on it. Maybe you don't know because I know it's not public knowledge there, Brandon, but like a school at UCF's financial level right now, right? Like, we're not talking about the future and projections and all that stuff. Like, what percentage of the football locker room, of the scholarship athletes, are getting paid? Is that higher than 50%? Is it higher than 80%? I have no idea.
I would think, and this is kind of speculation, this kind of informed speculation. I would think it's probably at least half of the 85. It's probably at least half. If
so
not,
Trey, you would have made it.
It's getting to a point though with a lot of these programs where it's going to be like it's everybody. I think
I mentioned at Texas A&M, it's got to be everybody.
It's everybody. Like in most of these schools, there's a minimum threshold that everyone gets at least something. Like, I think I'll bring up Texas Tech because they're, obviously a peer school of UCF in the Big 12. They just signed the #1 recruiting class. Every player, all 85 on scholarship, will make, I believe, a minimum of $30,000. Every single player from the backup. I mean, as long as you're part of the 85 on scholarship, everyone from the long snapper to the backup tight end, everybody. Texas Tech. Texas Tech.
Yeah, not A&M.
Not A&M. So I'm just saying that's a peer school of you. That's like, on a recruiting standpoint, that's going to be like the biggest competition, I think, for UCF going forward, recruiting in the Big 12. So that's where they are. I know exactly where UCF is. I know a little bit, but not everything. So I don't think they're at that point to say, hey, we can pay everybody a little bit of something. I think it's probably going to end up being more than half when you start to think, well, there's signing class and guys that, that came back, because they didn't go in the portal, they're getting a little, and I don't know what everyone's getting. Like, I don't know, but they're going to get some, I think at least half will get something.
Yeah. You can just look at when you drive by the field house next time, right? And look at the parking lot and see who's got a Hellcat and who's got a, V6 and who's got a Tundra. That'll tell you everything you need to know.
I was about to say, Brandon, you're really hurting Trey in the bank account there. He's like, what the? Going to Nebraska would have been a small bag.
Well, that's why he went to Nebraska, right, Trey?
Back pay or something.
That's why he went, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, we'll see what happens with Nebraska going forward, but I mean, they've got the fan base and they've got, I mean, from an NIL standpoint, they can be extremely competitive.
Yeah, I think I think somebody told me that the quarterback, the #1 quarterback they signed, I think he's going for like 2.53 million.
I was told. I did hear on that one. I heard he's getting $750K the first year. Now, if there's a multi-year contract, maybe he's going to get that. I heard he's getting $750. Actually, that's one of the few things I heard from someone who should know that he's getting $750 to go to, and that's kind of the going rate. I think some people get a little bit out of hand thinking guys are getting millions and millions and millions of dollars. The top quarter, he was like the number one rated quarterback.
Yeah, he was the number one in the class.
Yeah. So that's a little different. All right. And so, I mean, he's also unproven. Yeah. When you talk about a Dylan Gabriel and some of these other quarterbacks in the portal, they've at least proved that they can play at the college level. You know, not every 5-star pans out, but
so you're thinking like it could be like 2 to 3 over the whole.
Yeah, I actually did hear a rumor that he was getting $750 to flip from Georgia to Nebraska. That makes sense. I think Georgia would have been in the same range. I just think he always wanted to go to, whatever. This isn't a Nebraska podcast, but I think he always wanted to go to Nebraska with his family, and so that made sense.
Yeah. Well, I will say this, like, to your point, Brandon, about it never stopping and the head coaches being involved. I can tell you a couple of years ago, I was, there are certain conferences that have their spring meetings where I live in the Destin area. And so I was having a cigar with one of said coaches, and his phone was constantly coming up with people negotiating. So it was, hey, what's he want? Okay, blah, blah, blah. And this is where, guys get involved with these quasi
agents.
Agents, right? And they're calling whoever it is on the staff members calling the head coach and saying he wants this. Okay, no, I'm good with that, or I'm not good with that. I mean, literally during the course of this cigar, and we had cigar and then we had dinner afterwards, it was literally, I could probably say 60 calls. And some of them were, they'd say yes to somebody, and then he'd call the mom and talk to the mom. Hey, we're happy. Like, I'm sitting here, I'm listening to them like do this. And I'm like, this is what it was 2 years ago. I can't imagine what it's like now. You know what I mean?
It's insane.
It's
I mean,
crazy.
this is the fact we're talking about this. I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, I would have thought you were nuts, that we're talking about guys getting paid this and that and negotiations and coaches being involved and deciding who's worth what. And it's absolutely insane. I mean, college football is still popular. Obviously, the ratings are bigger than they ever were, but it kind of, I don't know. I mean, it kind of makes you nostalgic for the good old days of like 5 years ago when, guys were playing for the scholarship and the love of the game and all that stuff. But I mean, players should get paid. I mean, the amount of money college football generates, I mean, I don't have a problem with the concept of it. I think players should be compensated. I mean, coaches make an insane amount of money. I mean, Scott Frost, how many millions did he make from Nebraska? And it was, Trey, you played a role in it, but I'm just saying, like McKenzie Milton is the reason.
Interception, bro.
Yeah, the interception was big. You play a role, but McKenzie Milton is really, almost you can say primarily responsible for the contract that Scott Frost got. I mean, all you guys played a role, but it's like,
a big chunk was how great he was. We all,
yeah. Speaking of which, is he gonna go a second year without a job? Unless he maybe latches on NFL analyst somewhere, that'll be interesting. I don't know.
I think Trey and I talked about this on the pod a while back. For Scott, he's got certain jobs and certain expectations for the job that he's going to take. So I think he's perfectly fine picking and choosing which ones he wants.
He's not hurting for money still. So I think he's good. I think he's good.
No, he's not. He's Gucci, literally.
Yeah. Every day.
So Brandon, like, I love this kind of conversation because it's such a big topic, not just for UCF, but all the other schools, the G quote unquote 6 now, or whatever you want to call it. It's interesting on how it affects them, because now you're seeing schools like UCF, we're picking up schools, not just out of FCS, like top level talent, like All-American talent in FCS, but we're also going into G5 schools and we're saying, hey, these guys are good enough, these are not. And now we're part of the problem, per se, when it comes to picking up some of these players. Great, McCall was a great example of that. Ended up going to NC State. We talked about him a little bit on here. Where does that put UCF in your opinion? Are we like bottom middle? Are we mid? Like, are we
like as far as like
middle class? Yeah, like obviously.
Are you just talking about just generally speaking, or NIL?
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, just generally speaking, when it comes to how desirable we are. I mean, obviously, we're not going to be able to throw money around like Texas, but like, where are we in the pecking order of the recruiting game for transfers in FBS? And I'm not just talking about P5. I'm talking about FBS.
I mean, that's really tough. I would tend to say just if you just look at a P4 standpoint. I mean, I think anyone in P4 is ahead of anyone in G5.
Right.
I would just say probably middle of the pack, lower of the pack. I don't know. That's hard to say because I mean, if you're UCF, yeah, you got a lot of stuff going for it, but then I think sometimes UCF people sort of get an enhanced view of where the program is and where it just kind of there's back-to-back.
Not UCF fans, Brandon.
Undefeated. I just kind of like. I think UCF fans have an inflated sense of self-worth sometimes. I'm kind of guilty of that myself, but I would just say middle of the pack to lower the pack. Maybe I don't know. It's really tough to answer because I know a lot of schools have way more money. The problem with UCF is that they're competing against teams that have already been making huge revenue checks from their TV deals, and they already have facilities. They have palatial stadiums. They have state-of-the-art facilities, and UCF is really lagging behind in that area. So when you look at where all the money goes now, that was a mindset shift that had to change. If you're Terry Mahajer, if you're Mark Wright, and you're the guys at UCF and you're wooing shareholders and donors, and all of a sudden it's like, that money you're giving to us, maybe you need to give that to the kingdom so we can go buy some players. I mean, that was tough. UCF didn't want to get behind. I mean, most schools didn't want to, do that. And now they've been forced to do that. So, you need, it's difficult from a fundraising standpoint because you still got a lot of projects you need to fund. I mean, the TDT money was hopefully huge. Everything works out. It's going to be a godsend for what UCF hopes to do with the stadium. Because without it, it's tougher and tougher. I mean, some of these other schools, they've already built awesome facilities. They don't need to touch that, football building for 20 years, some of these places, but UCF, they need to upgrade in a lot of areas. So, from that standpoint, UCF would probably be lower tier P5.
Yeah. It's interesting to me too. Cause I think about, and I know we all compare, but I think about Danny White, right? And his ability to galvanize the average fan versus Terry Mahajer. Like he's pretty good at finding money from bigger donors and like you said, TDT funds and things like that. He's good at that. I don't think he's as good as galvanizing the average fan. So I wonder, from an NIL perspective, if DW were here, would he be able to galvanize the average fan better and help the NIL better?
From the NIL perspective, I mean, that's kind of debatable. Is it the athletic directors? Is it solely his responsibility? Where is the head coach in that? Is it a team effort? Is it the fundraisers for the NIL? I mean, I'm not, and I think it's also fan base. It's like some of these SEC schools, like when they went to this collective based fundraising, basically to buy players, like it wasn't an issue. Like they've been doing it under the table for years, and their boosters knew and understood that. And whether it's the boosters recruiting other boosters, they just jumped right in. Like it wasn't a big deal. With UCF and some other schools, it has to be an education process. And we had kind of explain, well, this is what we need to do, and this is why we need your stuff. I mean, I think you walk into Bounce House on a Saturday and you start quizzing random fans, and there's still that most probably still don't even understand how it works, to be honest. But these SEC teams, they know, they understand how it works. And even the fact that we can have a candid conversation like we're having right now, we're talking about, guys signing for this or that. And I don't know if I would have felt even comfortable talking about this a year ago. I mean, that's how much it's changed. Like you kind of knew what it was, but you kind of don't talk about it in those candid terms. Cause I know it's a big turnoff. I mean, from fan base wise, I would hesitate posting some stuff. I think it's gotten to a point where people have had to kind of sort of adjust and deal with it. But that's the reality of recruiting. Like, we can talk about, like I said at the beginning, like, oh yeah, UCF, the Big 12, they're recruiting at a higher level. Well, those guys, those 4-star guys, they're NIL is a big reason they're coming to UCF too. I mean, it's the truth. It's not. I mean, we could say it's Gus, we could say it's Big 12, we could say it's UCF in Orlando, but no, if they weren't winking and nod that there's going to be an NIL deal when you enroll in January, if that wasn't part of it, I don't think UCF signs 8 4-star players. Let's just be honest. But that's how it is at every school right now. So I think the fact that we're able to talk about it candidly is a big change. Even 6 months ago, I'm not sure if the fan base and just the UCF culture was ready to kind of embrace it. But I think with SJ and the kingdom and kind of the education process that's kind of gone on, it's just a process we all got to have to deal with it and adapt to it.
Well, let's we've NIL'd this to death. So let's go ahead and pivot a little bit and actually talk about the incoming, pivot, right? Our incoming recruiting class. Yeah, I'm interested to hear your take on a couple of things. One, who you feel like the standouts are for this class. I mean, obviously we have 8 or 9 4-stars. Last year we had like 2 or 3 4-stars and it was a big deal, right? Now we've got 8 or 9 coming in. So it literally is a paradigm shift. And the 3-stars we got are high level 3-stars. They're not borderline 3-stars, mid-level 3-stars. A lot of them are borderline 4-stars. So I'm interested to hear your take on that. Who do you think the contributors are going to be? And then, by and large, I know communication is less than what it was in the past, but how much more of a yo-yo are these recruiting cycles as they kind of go along? Or do you feel like once the folks that are committing typically make a decision and either silent or you kind of get an indication, or is it really a roller coaster ride like the rest of us feel it is?
Well, as far as a recruiting standpoint, I mean, people are committing earlier and earlier. I don't know, Trey, it feels like you were late commit, right? Didn't you get into January and it was like maybe a week or two before signing day and you were taking visits and you were a senior? I mean, you were kind of like, you were one of the last commitments if I recall.
Yes. Yep. It was me, like Chris Williams, Jemias Pittman. Like we were all late January guys.
Yeah, that's not a thing. Like signing days are there's no signing day in February. Yeah, there's technically some day you can say no one's signing in February. Like everyone's class is done in December, but recruiting is earlier and earlier. I mean, I haven't totally jumped into 2025 coverage yet. I'll get there in a couple of weeks, but you're going to have junior days in January, February. Then you have spring practice when guys are visiting constantly in March and April, and then it's all geared up to official visits in June, and most of these guys will commit in June and July. And for the most part, that's kind of the recruiting cycle. And then it's just holding on to the guys throughout their, senior years. And then they sign in December and they need to do something about that early signing period. Cause it's just absolute. We've been talking about the craziness of December. Most of these guys have been committed since June and July. Most of the classes have been done. They need to be able to sign in August or something. I mean, you can sign a basketball class in November. I don't know why we're waiting until middle of December, especially now that portal is as big as it is. It's just one less thing that I don't think coaches need to worry about. Like the UCF's in Tampa getting ready for a bowl game, and they're having to do like a signing day press conference. I mean, that's kind of insane.
Well, it's funny. We talked about that for Georgia Tech last week, and it came up. Who was it that talked about it? Somebody talked about it on Twitter, a big name coach. And last week, when we were talking about the Georgia Tech recap, like how much does that affect? There were already short practices anyway. How much does that affect bowl prep? Because I felt going into it, and when I previewed the game, one of the things I was concerned about was Gus's comment where he said, "Oh, now we can finally focus on the bowl game." It's like how much of that, that last few moments in the recruiting cycle, when you have an early bowl game like what we had with the Gasparilla Bowl this time, with 4 games difference between the signing day and the actual game, how much does that eat into prep and their ability?
It does. Are they going to be perfectly honest and candid about it? They're going to spin it and say like, we worked just as hard on that. But honestly, if they didn't have to feel like they had to go on the road, and they're going on the road to meet with portal people too, as the portal recruiting was kind of intertwined with the late. UCF pretty much knew who they were signing from the high school ranks, but you have to, you got to do the in-home visit, and you can go on, you just kind of have to go through the motions just to make everyone feel good about signing. You kind of, feel a responsibility to do that. Now, all these staffs have analysts and all these other people breaking down film now that maybe, back when O'Leary and Trey played, and maybe didn't have that number of people, but they have more people to do that. But if they had more of their undivided attention on the bowl game, would it have made a difference? Maybe. I don't know. I can't really answer that definitively without being part of the program, but it just seems like there's got to be a compromise somewhere. It was Gus's buddy Hugh Freeze at Auburn head coach. He came out and said it after they got their butts beat by was it Maryland? Yeah, Maryland in the Music City Bowl. And he pretty much said that, they were so focused on recruiting, they barely paid attention to the bowl game, and he thought their offensive game plan was subpar, was lacking because they didn't really spend a lot of time on it. I mean, he came out.
I mean, that way on our defense.
If that doesn't sum up how useless bowl games are, I don't know what does. Like, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, I remember, I don't remember if you guys remember, Brandon, but when Coach Frost first went to Nebraska, they were recruiting for Nebraska and coaching us, and they were exhausted just doing that. Meanwhile, I remember Coach Heupel and them, they were all out recruiting UCF. So just that period is busy.
It's nuts.
Now you add the early signing period. Now you add all these other visits in transfer portal. That was before then. And they were busy again, almost 5, 10, 6 years ago. They were busy. So
I remember that story because Adrian Martinez was like the guy that Nebraska felt like they had to get quarterback wise, and he lives all the way in California. Northern California. And there was something where he was trying to secure his commitment or do an in-home visit in December, and then he's on a private jet, flying from wherever it was in Fresno, wherever the kid was from, all the way back in the middle of the night. It's I don't know, 5-hour flight, however long it is, landing at Sanford at 7 in the morning or 8 in the morning and taking a car straight to the practice field.
Straight to practice, and his eyes were bloodshot, he just got out of bed. We'd never seen him like that. We knew he was tired.
Yeah, some people were saying he was ill, just
it
going
was
up and just he was physically wrecked.
Yeah,
from having to go through that, and he was doing that almost every day. And that was maybe the extreme example of just going coast to coast, but I mean that's absolutely insane. I think that was the first year of the early signing period, so we didn't, and it was kind of all new to us, but
exactly,
that's just absolutely crazy.
Yeah, and then you throw a conference championship in there as well if you're playing in the conference championship game as well. I mean, all of that it adds up, and I felt for me, and I'm just going to speak for me, and this may be a hot take. It probably is a hot take. Everything I say is a hot take, but anyway, with the defense, I just felt like we had more preparation going into and what I saw us do on defense in prior games and conference games, and being able to change things up and have specific things changed for specific styles of offense. We just played base the whole time and we didn't adjust. And I have to think that Gus would not have gone into that game or allowed Addy to go into that game, or Addy wouldn't have gone into that game because he was making halftime adjustments in the later conference games, but he didn't do it in this game. I have to feel like some of that is the lack of prep. And then once we went off of scripted plays offensively in the bowl game at Tech, the offense just kind of got mired. Part of that, part of that was defense. Part of that was there wasn't as much. There weren't as many plays on the call sheet as there normally are. I didn't see as many variations in this bowl game. So I honestly feel like it did affect game prep because they couldn't do it. They didn't know who they were going to play early on, so they didn't know who they were going to have to prep for. So that's just my thought on it.
I mean, I think every facet of the team's responsible for the loss. Like I said, offense pretty much disappeared. There was that opportunity to go up 21-3. Kobe drops a touchdown. And then after that, special teams played a big part of it. I have no idea what happened to Colton Boomer as the season went on.
I think he has dead leg. I said that on the show. I really do think he has dead leg.
I just don't understand. If they know he's not 100%, why not give, Grant Reddick a shot? Unless they just don't, they feel like, and that's what it seems like to me, that they feel a dead leg Colton Boomer is still better than Grant Reddick. So,
or at least have Grant do the kickoffs or something. But, you know what I mean?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what's going on there. And then, defensively, you said, UCF couldn't stop the run the entire year. Why were we surprised? Because we should have been surprised they couldn't do it against Georgia Tech either. We didn't even stack the
box. That's the thing that killed me is we didn't even stack the box. It's like, all right, the easiest adjustment you could make is stack the box. If they're going to run all over you, make them do it vertically because our DBs are stronger, I think, than what our linebackers are. And make him throw. He threw 13 times during the game. 13 times. The guy, and he wasn't very accurate. So, he was a running threat. They had their running game, and they were playing power ball the whole time. And other than a few things where they were pulling guards and things like that. And again, I don't want to rehash Georgia Tech, but it just frustrated the holy heck out of me that we were in a base defense. There was nothing. There was no, nobody was blitzing. I mean, we had blitzers, but it was like stuff like base blitzes. There was nothing disguised. There was nothing changed. And you get to the end of the season. Go ahead, Ben. You're literally licking your lips, getting ready.
I just want to interject that like Georgia Tech had the number 29 recruiting class in the country, and they had the same date for their bowl game. So and they beat us. Apparently their coaches can walk and chew gum at the same time. Like what's your job is to prep your team for the upcoming game and recruit for the future. I mean, that's a total job. I mean, we pay the coaches enough. We talked about paying players. We pay the coaches enough. I mean, that's the gig, man. 20 hours a day. Like you said about Coach Frost, you're preparing your team and you might be flying across the country to go. I mean, if what you're saying is true, which it was kind of evident in the bowl game. Maybe it is true that our coaches didn't prepare our team to win that game. I think that is a real problem. That's a problem with us on down. I mean, you talk about no halftime adjustments. And you guys know football a lot better than I do, but I mean, we could pretty much see the game plan that Georgia Tech was going to run in that second half, and it was running the football.
It was power run. It wasn't even running the football. There was nothing fancy about it. It was just power run the whole time. It's like at some point, stack the box.
I mean, I think you guys talked about it last week. I mean, it was how many? It was 18. Maybe I'm being generous. I think it was 18 run plays in a row.
23 run plays.
Excuse me. Yeah, I knew I was being nice. 23 straight run plays in a row, and we couldn't stop it. It's like, I mean, we have the talent. Like why didn't it show up? And so the whole it'd be different if Georgia Tech had a number 80th ranked, recruiting class in the country, but they're 3 slots ahead of us at number 29. And they beat us. So they're better prepared and they're better recruiters. I mean, we're talking about Georgia Tech here. I mean, they've been around longer than we have.
Georgia Tech's average star ranking, Brandon, correct me if I'm wrong, is not higher than ours. They just had more numbers.
Yeah, I think they're recruiting. I mean, it's still good for them. I mean, they sign a good class. I think if you sign more players, you have a higher rating. I mean, higher ranking, higher point total. You get a higher ranking.
Understand it's a little the system right now is just we're in this weird, I don't want to even call it a transition period because I just feel like this is just what we have to get used to, but it's weird period where it's tough for fans to get used to because all of this stuff is going on at the same time and not all of it is positive from a fan perspective, a lot. So a lot of it's not very positive from a fan perspective, and just something that I wanted to ask you and just Brandon is like, I'm excited that we got the highest ranked recruiting class in the country, but should I get excited about these guys? I mean, are they going to play significant reps? Like, I don't know. Like, we were excited 2 years ago about Jordan McDonald. I mean, is he going to come back? Like, I don't know. Maybe he already is. He's coming back. I don't know. But it's I wouldn't want to sacrifice RJ Harvey for another year to make sure Jordan McDonald comes back. But by the same token, it's like he was our biggest guy. He was he was the guy that was our biggest recruiting everybody else.
Our biggest recruit we lost, right? Which he played for Texas yesterday, and that was CJ Baxter. We always know. I know that it's the running joke. Like it's just like Michael Penix, right? We just missed on Michael Penix, and then he blows it out at Washington. It's funny how the ones we just miss on seem to blow up and do really, really well. But Brandon, it is a valid question to you. What do you think about what Ben said?
Just as far as what should you be excited about or who should you be excited?
Who should we be excited about? Who's going to be able to contribute next year? Do you think anybody's going to contribute next year?
The fact that I think 13 out of the 18 are going to be here in spring ball and spring practice. I think we'll have a decent idea who's going to be a contributor right off the bat. I mean, I think last year, we started, we knew John Walker was going to come in and play. We heard a lot about Randy Pittman making moves, and when preseason got here, we heard about, Braden Marshall. We'll find out soon enough. I just from listening to Gus in his press conference, when you look at wide receiver, that's going to sort of be, I don't know. I think there's some transitionary stuff happening with their wide receiver. It's been only Kobe and Javon seems like they ever get the ball in these games. Kobe announced earlier this week that he's coming back. I know Javon Baker has announced that he's coming back. However, we'll see what happens there. Okay. I know he's not 100% in the boat. I think he's still a good chance he still may go to the NFL. We'll see what happens. I mean, nothing's official till it's official, I mean, someone can always change your mind again in the case of Javon. So we'll see if Javon really is here next year or not. But if he's not, I think UCF signed a lot of wide receivers for a reason. They've got to develop some more receivers at some point. I mean, these guys have been transfers. I mean, Xavier Townsend's, has been a homegrown receiver. I wish he would have gotten the ball more than he did this year. But what I was about to say is Gus was very high on Bradell Richardson, one of those 4-star players from the Tampa area. Really talk highly of him, being a special player in this class that's going to play early. So I'm excited to see what he can do. I'd love to see these young guys, because in a perfect world, like if you're a fan, if you just follow UCF, that's what you want. You want the young guys. You want the guys that wanted to come here out of high school. You want to see him hit the field. You want to watch him develop over multiple years. And that's why fan base. That's why they're rooting for Mikey Keene. I mean, he's a guy that wanted to come here. He stuck around. He wanted to fight for the job. And you bring in these transfers that, played at some other school. They only have 1 year left. Like, there's guys who are, people joke on the message board. This guy's like, oh, I'm declaring for the NFL draft or whatever. Like, they're like, I barely even know who this guy was. Like, he was on the team this year. Like, we don't even know this, but like, he was just part of, like, he was a name, like, you look at the roster, like he played, like, you don't really get to know the guys when they're just here for a year and they move on. So yeah, in a perfect world, I want all these guys to be playing big roles. I think that's better for me. That's better for the fans. That's better for everybody. But I mean, the portal is just kind of reality where you got to plug holes these days. But yeah, hopefully there's opportunities for these guys to start to play. I mean, you got to start building on that offensive line. It seems like it's kind of been portal based. Hopefully a guy like Walt Claire Flynn, kind of, they feel like maybe he could be a center of the future. I know they brought in a transfer center, but I'd love to see that guy, because that was important. Like for Matt Lee, when we look at he started playing pretty much right away when he got to UCF. I think he played in 4 games, and then by the next season he was starting at center. So I mean, you'd love that to be the case. Maybe Walt Claire, can maybe get some playing time, and then by 2025 he's UCF starting center. We'll see. Kylan Fox at tight end. He's one of those guys. He has, receiver type skills. He's got to improve as a blocker, but he can be, a total mismatch. I think Gus told him one time, can't I say his last name? The guy that played at Auburn, CJ Uzama. Is that
Uzama? Yeah.
Uzama. That's it. He's kind of comparable to that sort of player. Excited to see what he can do. And they signed a lot of DBs, Jalen Hayward, AP Hayward from the Space Coast, a lot of these guys, we'll see what happens with that. But, I hope that, with the recruiting class, that we'll start to see more and more of these guys playing major roles.
Yeah, I'm hoping so too, because to your point, Brandon, we talk about this all the time. It's like Trey, like, when I got to meet Trey, a long time ago, or Jemias Pittman or whatever, it was when the freshmen would go out to the practice field and you got to meet them at those football days, and like you walked around and you got to meet people and talk to them, and Otis Anderson and my son like had a pretty close relationship and all this stuff. You don't have that these days, and that connection to the program. And I agree with
the policies of the current head coach, where it's like, we're private. This is our program, and we don't want anyone around it. We don't want media. We don't want fans. We don't want to have open anything. I think so. A lot of these coaches, if we're being honest, they don't even want to have a spring game. I mean, there's something about Scott Frost I heard when he first got here. He was naive about a lot of things as far as being a head coach. I heard that he balked his first year, that he didn't want to have a public spring game because he thought he could just, keep it behind closed doors. And, because he doesn't want, he was so protective of his offense. He didn't want anyone watching what they were doing. And these spring games, they literally got to dumb everything down and figure, well, we can't show this, we can't show that, we got to put on something, but it's a completely worthless practice basically. And a lot of these coaches, if they could get away with it, I don't even think they'd want to have an open spring game. But this is kind of how all these coaches have been, like Frost, Heupel, Gus. They're all just kind of protective and private, and they just kind of begrudgingly, I think, kind of go along with some of the stuff they got to do. And that's the thing that you miss. Like, you need to involve the fans. You need to have the media. You need to kind of make it like Florida State doesn't. They're not afraid of having media go to practice. They're not afraid of having fans come to an open practice. That's always been a gripe of mine. I've been vocal about the last few years that, you kind of miss that opportunity. The thing about George O'Leary, I think he sort of is misunderstood by the fan base in a way. Like they think like, he was just kind of a gruff demeanor and, kind of an ass and kind of, a lot of the decisions he thought of, the fans were, meant a lot to him. Like he made decisions that he made sure that it was fair to the fans. Like he did things like lunch with George. He had all fans to come. He had things like open practices and things like, he thought of the fans. And sometimes I'm just not really sure, who really thinks of the fans of these days.
Interesting. Yeah. No one. Nobody.
No one does. The answer is no one.
Well,
It takes for the privilege.
If you have, that, and then if you have to pay right away, and the amount that they're getting paid, and the fact that you have to win right away, then they're so wholly focused on that. I don't think that relationship is there. And Gus, it's funny because he says more in his mannerisms than he does in his coach speak. So it's like when he's stressed out about something or he's frustrated about something or whatever, you'll see him do certain body things. We talked about that on here too, in his pressers. And by the way, I want to shout this out. Anybody who doesn't watch the pressers, always remember that Brandon Helwig always gets the first question, and there's a reason for that. So that's another reason why you should check out ucfsports.com. See, I'm plugging you.
Yeah, it's not really I don't know. It just kind of
it's a thing.
I'm always there because I'm always there. Basically, I'm not I had COVID. I think for the first one in August, but that was like one of the first times I missed anything in like forever. So I'm just always there. But
I've been there for a couple decades.
But you gotta have to sort of start off with a softball. Like you can't just be like, first question, like asking some random question about, it's kind of have to.
What kind of candy do you like? It's candy corn.
I stopped doing that this year because it's completely worthless. Like Gus cannot handle questions that don't involve general football speak. Like you can't ask him a fun question. He'll freeze up and like, he just doesn't respond well to this question. So it just kind of was a waste of time. It kind of made me look kind of a fool too. Cause I would always ask those questions through the years for Frost and Heupel. And honestly, if you go look on the local TV news, those are the ones they're running on the 6 o'clock news, the kind of the fun questions. And it's hard to kind of get that with Gus. Like he's kind of awkward in terms of
you should ask him what his second favorite Waffle House thing is besides smothered and covered.
Yeah, but it's not really, he has that was an Auburn thing. Everyone tried to keep that on, with UCF's First Watch is the big donor. He hasn't been. I don't even know if he goes to Waffle House anymore. Like that's not really been a thing since he's been at UCF. People always will try to bring that up. He's like, "Oh, I'm a First Watch guy now." So,
well, he kind of has to be.
Yeah.
That's the talking points. But yeah, no. So we kind of talked about who you think will be kind of like an impact player for us next year. Generally speaking, do you feel like we're going to pick up any additional impact players in the transfer portal? We talked.
Yeah, about. Yes. In fact, you have to. Look at defense right now. UCF has no linebackers committed. I know it was out there that a guy from Charlotte committed. He's no longer committed. They had to drop him. Something about academics, and I don't know specifically what it was, but whatever his credits were, or maybe even I'm not sure if he attended. I don't know. so whatever it was, they don't think they could get him enrolled, so they dropped him. And then I see that he's visiting Florida State this weekend. If he couldn't get into UCF, I don't know how he could get into Florida State, but I don't know. So UCF has no linebackers committed. They have to get some linebackers. I think we're going to get some linebacker news pretty soon, but you have to get guys who are experienced at linebacker. That's pretty much the biggest need. These are going to have to get some impact players. Deshaun Pace from Cincinnati is a name that's been linked for a while. Like this is kind of like Cincinnati farm teams. Like the farm team is at Cincinnati. If he commits, that'll be the third guy from Cincinnati in the portal to commit to UCF between Brian Threats, the safety, and Miles Montgomery, the running back. So, they got to get some linebackers. I think they got to get some, another defensive end or so. And I think they're always looking for, defensive backs. So I know they signed a lot in this class, but you got to, you pretty much play 5 guys at any given time. So you got to load up at that position. I know they're going to continue to recruit that area as well.
Yeah. Strong hitters, people that will do more than tackle with their shoulders. I think, the physicalness is a lot of what we talked about defensively that we were missing this year, is like the ability to be physical and hard hitting and come down hard on the running game. And, safeties that they're going to knock your socks off, or defensive backs that are not just going to bounce off. Or I think size at linebacker. We talk about lines all the time and how that's a difference for the P4, but I think linebacker is another one that's underutilized. The ability to have both size and speed at a linebacker position is huge against in defending good offensive lines and bigger backs, because the as much as we talk about the difference between a 3-star and a 4-star is a lot of times size. They may be just as skilled, but they don't have the measurables. I feel like we're now running to that point where we need to catch up when it comes to that. And part of that scheme too, right? So, schematically, are you running with linebackers that are a little bit smaller but can run with tight ends, or are you looking for guys that are going to be able to run stop? And I think that's one area where we need to kind of catch up. And linebackers, it feels like to me, Brandon, I don't know if it feels this way to you, but 2 or 3 years we've been talking about needing to reload on linebackers.
No, I go back to the thing. I think UC was wasting their time recruiting some of these guys that had clear issues and like completely wasted, developmental time. I mean, we're talking about scissor ants. There's not even worth talking about this guy anymore, but he had so many issues. Like if you go back and look what he did in high school and he was coming off an injury, like why you waste your time with this guy is beyond me. And then the other guy, teammate, Brandon Jennings, like he had committed. I think he's committed to 10 different schools between high school and college by this point. Like fickle. There's just guys that you got to make better decisions on, and just in terms of like their character and just their work ethic and all this stuff. So these were 2 players that I think they thought were going to be a big part of the linebacker core that were complete whiffs.
So the folks that we have our eyes on, and you don't have to say
you haven't developed anybody. You haven't developed anybody that you feel like can actually play at a high level. We'll see Cam Moore. What is his second year here this year? We honestly barely played. I don't think they're comfortable with him being a starter next year. Maybe he'll get to that point, but I don't think you can say he's a starter level player right now. So I think whoever's playing linebacker is not on the team right now. We don't know. We have no idea what he could do. He was injured. So like jury's still out on him. He's got to get healthy, and we'll see how he is in the spring, but you haven't developed any linebackers, I think in Gus's time here.
So overall, if you were to give a grade to this year's transfer portal and potential transfer portal and high school players, what grade A through F would you give our progress thus far and what you're anticipating for the future?
Well, it's really tough because we don't know exactly how the portal is going to pan out, because I think some of those impact defensive players, like we don't know who they are yet, who's going to commit. Yeah. I think the fact you got KJ Jefferson goes a long way, because maybe just like a few days ago, I was just kind of wondering, well, if UCF can't get him, I honestly think, and we really didn't talk about him, but
well, we were going to. That was the next thing.
Okay, I think the fact that you end up with KJ Jefferson when all is said and done, is a major win when you look at, UCF was obviously always going to recruit an experienced portal quarterback in the month of December. At first, they were looking at Tyler Shuck from Texas Tech, injury prone. When he's healthy, he's pretty good, but he's injured a lot. So you're kind of putting so he went to Louisville, like he came on a visit, committed to Louisville after that. So UCF didn't get him, how all in they were on him, I'm not sure. But I mean, if he would have been ready to come to UCF, I think that would have been the guy they took and it would have been over. So then they move on to Grayson McCall. I think they engaged with Grayson. They didn't know Grayson was going to be as interested as he was. He came on a visit. Exactly what transpired is open to an interpretation. He visits NC State, he visits UCF, he comes to a basketball game. You can tell that they're, giving him the first class treatment. He ends up going to NC State. Was it NIL? Was he using UCF? I don't know. Grayson's from Charlotte. He's from the state of North Carolina. I looked at NC State's schedule next year. Out of their 12 games, 10 out of the 12 games are in North Carolina and South Carolina. I think 9 are in North Carolina. One is at Clemson in South Carolina, and then the 11th game's in Atlanta at Georgia State. So I don't know. He probably grew up as a fan. Who knows? His family, they can go to the games, whatever. They didn't get Grayson McCall, fine. But I think when KJ got in the portal, I think that was clearly like kind of the prototypical guts quarterback. And
so would you rather have had, if you could have your choice, KJ Jefferson or McCall?
KJ Jefferson, like for sure, like not even thinking about it, like automatically KJ Jefferson.
100%.
100%. I just think that he's proven it in the SEC. He's exactly the type of quarterback. I know he was injured a little bit this part, but he's a guy. I think he's going to be a lot more durable than John Rice Plumlee was. I think Grayson McCall was dealing with the injury issues, concussions, and stuff like that. I just think that he's going to be a lot more durable. The experience that he has. I mean, he beat Florida in the Swamp this year. He's going to have an opportunity to beat those guys back-to-back years. I just think with looking at who's available and who's potentially attainable for UCF, I don't think UCF could. Well, Cam Ward, I guess, is going to the NFL now, so it doesn't matter. But some of those guys, I don't think were in UCF's price range. Like I said, I don't know what KJ's price ended up being, but if he was in that attainable level, I think he was probably the best one that UCF could have hoped to get out of the portal. So the fact you got RJ coming back, now you know who your quarterback's going to, and there's no quarterback controversy. This is the first time really in a while. I mean, I kind of didn't really feel like there was a quarterback controversy this past year going into it, but how the fan base has been about John Rice, kind of been a divisive thing with Mikey and then Timmy, and I don't know where that came from, but I mean, I think it's going to be clear. I mean, it's going to be KJ is going to be QB1. It's not going to be up for debate. Bringing back RJ, bringing back Kobe, most of your offensive line. I think you're still going to see some portal offensive line additions here. I think the offense has an opportunity to be one of the best in the Big 12 next year.
It's kind of interesting because we talked about Grayson McCall on this podcast and a couple of the other QBs. It's interesting what NIL and all these changes have done because, say, in the NFL, you generally know who's available across the board. It isn't just, it's another. It's just interesting how there could be people, the QBs coming into the portal tomorrow that are like, this is kind of interesting.
The portal was technically closing today. We saw that the Liberty quarterback entered the portal like a few hours ago. So
yeah,
just to your point, like that would have been a guy probably UCF would have gone after if they didn't have KJ. So
I will say this about KJ Jefferson. So what I'm excited about, because I actually watched him quite a bit last couple of years. I had a person in my life that was very interested in Arkansas. So I watched him play a lot of games. He is very durable. And this year's supporting cast versus last year's supporting cast, I think he got an upgrade when it comes to the offensive weapons around him at UCF. Offensive line as well. Obviously, he doesn't have to pay D lines in the SEC, but we've got some pretty stout lines in the Big 12 as well. So at the end of the day, what it boils down to is from his ability to throw the deep ball, he's pretty solid at that. He has the ability to move around in the pocket. He has the ability to tuck and run. He's not going to hit you with his blistering speed, but he's pretty elusive. and he's hard to take down. Like he's one of those running quarterbacks that's not going to be taken down by it's not quite Blake Bortles level where he'd lower the shoulder and knock somebody over, but he is 6'2", and I think he's like, what, 240, 245, somewhere around there. That's a pretty big guy to try to bring down. That's wide receiver level. I do feel like, he wants to play for the NFL. I think he's going to do everything that he can, and I think he's got much better weapons at UCF, and I think he's going to do really, really well here. The only question I have is, how is the offense going to be impacted with his ability to either pick up or not pick up the offense by the time that we roll around to game time? I mean, that's 7-8 months from now. But there's something to be said for having timing, for having rhythm, understanding the offense enough so that you can make adjustments at the line. All of those different things that go into being a quarterback. Can he see the defenses as well? But he played really, really, really well. Not as well this past year, but the year before last. I was very, very impressed, and he had Arkansas humming there for a little while.
Yeah, I guess we got another 9 months to kind of see what happens with that. But I mean, the fact he'll be in here for spring. I mean, the only reason he's got a year is because the COVID year. Otherwise, his eligibility would be up and he wouldn't be here. So he's experienced. He's been a full-time starter since 2021. He's got some like 40 starts or whatever. So yeah, I think picking up everything probably I don't think will be an issue. And I'd be curious to see how everything meshes in spring. I guess we probably won't see a glimpse of it till the spring game, whenever that is. But yeah, I'm excited to see how the offense. I think just the biggest question right now is just defense. You got to get some linebackers and some other players, because that's clearly the biggest deficiency when you look at next year's roster.
How many wins do you think KJ would be worth over someone like Timmy? And I hate to throw that comparison out there because, Timmy's Timmy, but how do you like having an upgraded quarterback like that and bringing someone like that in? How many wins do you think that's worth to UCF?
I mean, that's impossible to answer right now. Is KJ going to pan out like we're all hoping he will? I mean, there's been examples of guys go to one school and they haven't. Then there's guys like Penix, who I don't even know how widely this is known outside of the dungeon, that he was on a UCF official visit 2 years ago before UCF got John Rice Plumlee, that UCF wanted Michael Penix. He was from Tampa, he was a Florida guy. And I think he kind of made some name for himself at Indiana. He was injury prone at Indiana, though. I missed a lot of time, and then now he's leading his team to the national championship. I mean, he's one of the best quarterbacks in college football. So, it's really tough to say exactly what is it going to mean until we kind of see how it is when he gets here. It's like, we didn't really know what to expect with John Rice Plumlee too. Like I maybe kind of overestimated him in AAC play. I just thought he'd be like a video game, just kind of like this guy at his speed and everything else. And there was a big learning curve with him, maybe more so because the fact he hadn't been a full-time quarterback. He had never really been a starting quarterback before he got to UCF. But I think the fact that he's more of a known commodity, I think, is going to help him along. It won't be the same as a John Rice Plumlee kind of learning on the job, so to speak. The only negative, I guess, is that you're only going to get 1 year out of him. So if there is a learning curve, if it does take a little while to get it going, he's only here for a year. I guess the positive with John Rice, he'll here at least 2 years. And you saw how much he improved. And I don't really, unfortunately, we never saw John Rice 100%, after Boise State, to see how he would have done against some of these big 12 teams. And you can see even in the bowl game, he was not 100%. So, but it is what it is. He's moving on, but yeah.
I think if he would have played a little bit smarter with his body, I think he would have gone a lot farther than he did. I think I did see a lot of progress with him as far as his ability to throw the ball. I think if he would have been like a junior starter, I think he could have done. And we say this like JRP didn't do well, but even while he was there, he did fairly well. So I I guess I'm monopolizing your time. We talked about a lot of different things. I love to talk with you, Brandon. I could talk with you for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours about football, just like Trey and I after the show and everybody else turns off the lights and goes home. We sit there and talk about different things. But I do want to ask you one quick question. One of the things that we do here is that we try to educate some of our younger fans, as to, different things of how it used to be for UCF fans, or some unique stories that they may not have heard about or know throughout our history. And I'd really love, and I know it's tough to pick one because you literally have like 20 years worth of stories and you've been close to the program. But are there, 2 or 3 things that are unique things that have happened at UCF, or unique things about being a student at UCF that you could pass on to prosperity, at least for now, because we will have you back on the show if you give us grace us with your time again. But just something that you could pass on that's unique that most people wouldn't know.
It's a great question. I'm not sure I could go in a million different directions with this. I just want to say, I guess, just kind of in the early days of me being around the program, about what a process it was just to kind of get people to care about UCF in large numbers, fan base, students, playing games at the Citrus Bowl. If you're a student, you got to do 10, 12 miles or however far it is. It's not in a great area. It's not the same as being on campus. And I see these students that, for the most part, have done a great job of kind of the bounce house atmosphere is led by the student body. And just ever since that stadium opened in 2007, just how tremendous that energy has been. And that was something that the program was really lacking. I mean, there wasn't much student support. And a lot of times in those early days, when I was around, late 90s, early 2000s, it was, you're always just kind of, you were regarded as second fiddle. It was like, oh, geez, we're playing a home game, and, Florida's playing a big game at the same time. And you would see the difference in the student section. Like, people, even UCF students, they were kind of secondary fans. Like they were still rooting for, Florida or Miami or Florida State or something. And that's what's changed, is that,
oh, it used to drive me nuts.
Yeah. Whether it's a stadium now that, people have kind of grown up, going to games and being, it's a lot easier than it used to be. And whether it's UCF, winning, it's kind of rising up the levels of college football. And now obviously in the Big 12, obviously that plays a huge role, but just in those early days, just how much of a struggle it was just to get, UCF, I always felt like had their consistent fan base of maybe about 15,000, maybe that, would be in the Citrus Bowl no matter what. But it was just always every week. It was like, what's the weather going to be like? What other games are going on at the same time? And, just getting people to care that, just seemed like it doesn't seem like that long ago. I guess maybe it is now, 20 plus years to
it's
some of
not,
games, but,
I tell everybody else, I still think like a 20-year-old, which sometimes is good and sometimes is bad. I've just learned more rules along the way. But like, when you and I get together, or Ben and I get together, or, whatever, it's because
we can talk about basketball is the same way. And Ben knows, yeah. I mean, he played in the venue in the old arena, and yep. He remembers what it was like. I mean, I remember, it's funny, we're about to talk about UCF hosting their very first Big 12 game against Kansas here coming up. I remember when UCF hosted their first Conference USA game, I believe was against Marshall. No, was it Marshall? Whoever it was it? I got to go back and look. I wasn't prepared for this, but whoever was that first game in Conference USA, I mean, I was pumped. Like I was like, this is huge. Like UCF has been playing in the A-Sun. They're playing like Georgia State and Mercer and these teams that obviously doesn't resonate. Now we're in Conference USA. We're going to be playing Memphis and UAB. And like, these are some big time schools. And like, whatever the attendance was, I mean, it was terrible. Like there was like, how it was, Ben, in some of those games sometimes, like there was like, there was no one in that upper bleachers, and you're just a scattering of people in those seats. It was like, I don't know, there was like a couple hundred people there. I mean, whatever it was really disappointing. I'm like, God, UCF has, like, there's people that root, like you wouldn't want to be here for the first game, in Conference USA. And even I remember my sophomore year, like we were on game
12 of a 14-game win streak, and we finally got on the local news. We finally got talked about on the local news. Like we were in the middle of the school record win streak that we had, and in 2004 there, and it was like we were super excited to get on the local news, like let alone anything beyond that,
Yeah, and then that's what's changed. I mean,
windmill dunk at in the middle of a conference game, and it got on Sports Center. Not any of the top 10 or anything like that. It was just like a little blip on Sports Center. We were so excited.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any question that UCF dominates the Orlando Central Florida market. I mean, in terms of just fan base, media, TV now. But it wasn't like that. It wasn't that long ago when, like you said, it was like they wouldn't talk about UCF. It was all about Florida. I remember UCF back in late 90s, early 2000s, they would intentionally schedule their weekly football press conferences on a certain day and time so it wouldn't conflict with Florida. Because a lot of the local TV media, they'd get in their news van and they'd drive up to Gainesville every week and kind of fawn all over Spurrier or whoever was there then, Zook or whatever. And but I feel like UCF dominates this market. So I don't know. I could go into a million. We could talk for another 2 hours. We don't have the time. Maybe the next time I'll think of something else. But this is kind of like just how special it is to see how far UCF has grown. Because sometimes I don't know if people have the same perspective that we have. And if you've been around 10 or 15 years, you kind of know what it is. Obviously, any longer than that, you definitely know what it was like. But for the newer fans that have been around, since those Frost era, they've seen kind of a different side of UCF than kind of been on the definite upswing of things that some of us who are older have definitely seen the opposite side.
Yeah, I think the expectations game is definitely different. I think that for those of us that have been around the program a little bit longer, have experienced the ups and downs and all of that other stuff, it's easier to take things when it doesn't go as well. I will say this, though. I think the one thing that we all have is expectations for UCF to continue to grow. I don't think anybody expects UCF to get this level and stagnate. So what that looks like for us, like how long that ramp period is for us to really, get to a P4 level. I don't think people understand, those that haven't been around the program that long, could we beat a P4 any given Saturday as long as the refs weren't pulling an Auburn or, whatever? Yes, we could, right? We had the talent to do that, but to do that consistently, that's a whole nother level. And I think for us, our expectations are that we continue to grow. And as long as I continue to see that growth for UCF and that expectation that, I said when we got the invite, and this was on Nightline, our previous show, the expectation is not, no, we haven't made it. We've got the next rung of the ladder. For us to continue to progress into who we think UCF could be. We've just hit that next plateau, and it's taken us 7 or 8 years to hit whatever that next stage is. So it'll be really interesting to see where UCF is 7 or 8 years from now. I think that the one thing UCF has going for it is the administration has always been behind sports since John Hitt kind of switched his tune on that. Because early on, people forget, John Hitt was not on the sports train, but once he kind of flipped that script, the culture for UCF is, we're not going to stop. We're going to keep rising. And I don't think that's changed. The speed at which it changes may be different because we have jumped a level of competition. Yes, we could compete with these guys, with our good teams any Saturday, but to do it week in and week out, and to build the depth that we need to continue to not have a drop off if one of our guys goes out, because you're dealing with much larger athletes, and smash mouth football. And that's another crazy thing about the Big 12 is we went from an air raid style league everybody talked about, no defense, to a smash mouth running football league that's almost SEC style when it comes to running the ball. So bigger lines, etc. So it's an adjustment there too. But I feel like, Brandon, we've both seen it. I start my first year at UCF was 1999. That tells you how old I am. Pre Y2K. Remembering like trying to find some pirated online video stream where you had 75 pop-ups trying to watch a UCF football game to where we are today, and feeling, mad at the kids running around with FSU and UM and UF sweaters on, hoodies on, and all of that to where we are today. It's totally different. And I'm going to say this, it's not a bad thing, because I want our expectations to continue to be high. We just need to temper them when they don't go as fast as we would like them to go. So that's my advice as a aging, gray bearded, hair falling out UCF fan.
Well said, Roger.
All right, Brandon, I want to give you, like I told you before the show, you are more than welcome to hang out as long as you want, because I genuinely, anytime that I get to talk sports with you, I count it as a blessing, and I'm sure the viewers and listeners do as well. But I do want to give you a chance to plug the great work that you do without me doing it and sprinkling it throughout there. So tell people how to find you. And make sure you join the dungeon so that it is well worth the price of admission. I will say, just make sure you have a thick skin, because some people, but but the information that Brandon brings is amazing, and he deserves your dollar.
Yeah, well, I've been the publisher of ucfsports.com going on 20 plus years now. It was a passion of mine all the way back to pretty much when I was in high school, and I've carried it on all these years. It's an all-encompassing site, stories, interviews, message board. People just kind of shoot the breeze about UCF football. A lot of insider nuggets gets, some knowledge gets dropped on the dungeon, which is the name of the message board, if that wasn't implicitly clear. But yeah, it's the longest running message board, I believe, with UCF. A lot of us have been on there, 20 plus years. A lot of my people that, best friends of mine, I'm talking to, bunch of them right now, are basically met via that site, and it's brought us together. I mean, everyone talks about social media and Twitter and Facebook. I mean, this site was the social media for UCF really before those entities existed. So we've had a long time thing going, and, we appreciate that you check us out at ucfsports.com.
More than check them out, make sure you subscribe. Honestly, the information and the hints, even though sometimes they're cryptic and involve music videos, will definitely give you a good insight. And to Brandon's point, other posters that are tied in, there was a George O'Leary account at one time, didn't post, but definitely lurked the boards. So you never know who you're going to meet in the dungeon. And beyond all of that, beyond sports, I've met a lot of great people along the way that have helped and been very generous to me over the years as well, in life, in sports, and everything else. And the community that you've created is pretty amazing. I love that I'm a part of it. I've been a part of it for well over a decade, and will continue to be. And if there's any way that I can support you, you've got that as well. So, Brandon, anything that any of us can do to support you, we all appreciate you. And I encourage anybody listening to this or seeing this on YouTube, if you manage to see our faces, go follow him. Go follow him on Twitter. Make sure you get him on the social media. Make sure you're supporting him. Make sure you're retweeting him. Make sure you're liking him. Making sure you're on the message board, because bar none, there's nobody else more educated, more tied in, more passionate about UCF sports than Brandon Helwig. He's made a career and a life out of it. So thank you, Brandon, for everything.
Thank you, Roger.
Done. Yeah, no, I mean that wholeheartedly. And if you want to hang out, you're more than welcome to hang out. We're going to talk a little hoops next with Ben Stout. our resident 7-footer who
Okay.
barely.
Well, I think I got a little stuff to be working on, so I think I'm going to cut out of here. But I've enjoyed these hour 40 minutes or so I've been with you guys, and I'll be
way
on
longer than I expected and way appreciated.
I tend to ramble on a bit, but I enjoyed my time. And in any time in any future weeks, just hit me up. I'll be glad to join you guys.
All right, Brandon. Thank you so much. We appreciate you.
All right, guys. Good night.
Take care. All right. Like I said, I could talk to Brandon for as long as he'll talk to me. And, it's funny. There's been a lot of different UCF events over the years that, I always see Brandon. He's always at the events. He's always taking photos. He not only gives us news, but he's always at every event, gives us an inside view. He knows a lot of former players. And he actually takes photos. He's got these huge telescopic photos. I've got one actually right here in the living room that he took of my son and I at the Maryland game when we played at Maryland, and that big win in 2017. So yes, Trey, I was there. I don't know if you remember, but when people were up, oh wow, thanks, Trey. While people were up on the bench, when Jemias Pittman was up there jumping up and down on the bench during the game when everybody was fired up. Yeah, I was there. I said what's up to the guys, and so was Brandon. Brandon travels to every game.
We always saw Brandon.
Yeah, Brandon.
He has one of the most iconic pictures in UCF football.
JJ Wharton, the catch.
Yeah. That's his camera. That came from his camera. I mean, that I think that picture kind of adds to how special that catch was. It just encapsulates that time of UCF football and that highlight. It was just crazy.
Yep.
Yeah, I like I said, and I'll say this over and over again, and I'll say this you'll hear me sing his praises on this show because anybody else who's and I've created UCF media for a long time. Ben has been there along with me. Trey came on a little bit later. We had Andrew on recently who started it all from a podcasting standpoint. I was blessed to be a part of that. But Brandon was there well before that. And there's no person more passionate about UCF sports than Brandon Helwig, and no one more knowledgeable or more tied in, and he deserves your dollars. So
let me tell a quick, very 30 seconds story.
Go for it. A Ben story. Story time with Ben.
In 2012, I moved to Memphis. My wife and I at the time. It was just two of us at the time. We had 3 kids. We had 3 kids while we lived in Memphis for 5.5 years, but we had season tickets to UCF football and went to all the games and enjoyed them. And we moved to Memphis, and then we moved back in 2018, Christmas Eve 2018. But we moved back, and one of the first things we did once we settled in and everything was made sure we bought season tickets for football, and we made sure that we were back in that stadium with now our 3 kids. And so but I remember going to the spring game once we came back, and Brandon was just as I was walking around the stadium about to go in, Brandon was one of the first guys that came up to me and he's, hey Ben, how you doing? And we talked, and we were happy to be back. And even when we lived in Memphis, going to the UCF Memphis basketball games, whenever UCF would come into town there, Brandon would be there, and he would take pictures. Yeah, I have a couple of those pictures as well of Brandon posting to Twitter or whatever that hey, this is Ben Stout with his family.
Well, here's the thing. Let me preface this by saying this: having experienced the Ben Stout picture experience and being in marketing, right?
Yeah.
You cannot take the pictures horizontal as you normally would. You have to take them vertical because he's so much taller than I am, right? I'm 5'11", and it sounds like it's tall, but when you're next to Ben Stout, it's not so tall.
No. But no, I do remember that going to that spring game. We were so excited to be back and back in Orlando and back in our hometown, and it was just kind of like the icing in the cake when Brandon walks up to me right outside that main entrance there. And just, welcome back, and, all that. And we had a short conversation there. It was just like that full circle, like encapsulating UCF experience, because I was so happy to be back in that stadium with my family, but then walking in, we see Brandon. It was just like kind of added.
Brandon
it was like the addition we didn't know we needed at the time. So
Brandon
cool.
is UCF.
Yeah,
if
he
you
is
want to
UCF.
encapsulate UCF's journey, that's Brandon Helwig.
Mm-hmm.
And, I know you've heard me wax poetic before. Trey can speak to this too. What a kind of impact he's had on the community, UCF community, engagement with fans. UCF should have him on his payroll. Yeah. I know he'd never do it because he's independent, but he is literally responsible for a generation of fans' connection with UCF once they leave campus, and I'm proof positive of that. That was, I lived in Maryland, I lived elsewhere, and his content was my connection to UCF, and quite frankly, I don't know if I would have ever been on a podcast. I don't know if I would have ever done a radio show. I don't know if I would have been listening to Andrew and Trace when they were starting, and then gotten involved that way, or broadcasted live from Maryland's parking lot, or done any of the things that I would have done had he not created that bridge to the fan base. And now I get to be a part of that with you guys, and that's pretty amazing. But I'll never not credit a person who took a passion and turned it into a calling. And that's who Brandon Helwig is. Mm-hmm. And his product, what he puts out there, if UCF ever decides, when they talk about putting people in the Hall of Fame, in my opinion, Brandon Helwig belongs in the UCF Hall of Fame from a media perspective, just like they did for Mark Daniels, just like they did for other people. Brandon Helwig deserves. I'm going to start the campaign today in 2024. I think he should be in the UCF Hall of Fame because he has meant that much to UCF.
I agree. I know I wouldn't be here right now, forget on the podcast, but even doing all the things I've done with UCF, if it weren't for that piece of the puzzle. When I was younger, it was Kirk's Jerks and Rowdy Nights and all of those. Yeah. I mean, we taking bus trips with Rowdy Nights and Adrian up to Penn State to watch Brandon Marshall on defense. But, it was, it was a lot of those things that kind of made fans sticky. It's something that's happening in our business, and we talk about in business and in membership organizations and things like that a lot, is keeping people sticky. And the UCF Sports website and Brandon Helwig's, he left here because we know where he's all going, right? We already know what he's doing. He left here because he has so much other stuff to do for the greater good, and his own personal benefit too, which is perfectly fine. But the ucfsports.com and through Rivals and all that keeps UCF fans sticky for a long time, and being UCF fans and donating to the kingdom and doing all these things and attending games. So I 100% agree with you.
And he's humble as they come. That listening to us talk about him is probably the worst thing that we could do to him while he's on the show. Honestly, he is probably the most humble human being you'll ever meet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, all right. Now that we've gotten our Brandon love out of the way, let's go ahead and move on to and Ben, did you get to say what you wanted to say about football? I know you said that you had a couple of things that you wanted to mention about football before we move on to hoops, because it's time for hoops and hooping and hollering.
Yeah, no, I mean, for the most part. I mean, I think that listening to the pod last week and hearing you guys talk about how it just looked like we weren't prepared, and you guys said all the reasons why that it looked that way, more detailed in a more detailed way than I can articulate. But just being a football fan, I obviously agree. Watching that bowl game just felt like that it felt like what they were doing was a little obvious, the Georgia Tech, and we couldn't stop it. And we talk about
it goes beyond obvious when you run the ball 23 straight times. It's
obvious.
Beyond obvious.
Yeah,
like,
I mean,
this is my Roger yells at cloud segment because
well, I mean, and I guess it just, you know, a lot of the talk in the offseason going up to this football season was about Gus not calling plays for the first time, you know, having an offensive coordinator that he actually empowered to call the offense, and him stepping into this general manager role, you know, that, or the CEO role that head coaches in college football basically have to do nowadays. And that's another thing that if we had Brandon for another 2 hours, we could talk about forever. But and so a lot of attention was on Hinshaw, rightfully so. And we had some moments there where we questioned it, but it seems like there was a lot of moments this year, at least from my perspective. It just felt like the defense wasn't ready for the opponent and what they were going to bring forth, with the single exception of the Oklahoma State game, where you said, well, who's going to, and maybe not single exception.
Yeah,
because
I was going to say, we were ready for Oklahoma. I can tell you that right now.
So we were ready for Oklahoma, but Oklahoma, I mean, they're a lot of their like runs, like they had a lot of running, you know, they were a very good rushing offense in Oklahoma, but a lot of their runs came from the quarterback. They didn't have like a running back that was like, you know, an excellent like standout guy like Gordon is at Oklahoma State. And so like we keyed in on Gordon in Oklahoma State, and I think the football gods were smiling down upon us that day with the weather that was associated with that game too. But just with the exception of Oklahoma State, in my opinion, and Oklahoma was pretty good too, especially coming out of, I think that came out of a bye week. It just seemed like Addison Williams I don't know. There was just a lot of moments this season where it just felt like maybe he wasn't quite ready to be a defensive coordinator at this level. And you guys know that a lot better than me. You guys can see things on the from a defensive perspective, especially more than I can see. A lot of the times you lose me when you talk about keys and gaps and all that stuff.
Sorry, we're using jargon.
Yeah, but honestly, just as a fan watching the games, it just felt like we had some dudes on the defensive side of the ball, just like the offensive side of the ball. We have some, high level talent, and when game in and game out, that high level talent doesn't appear to be in the right position to stop. And I'm talking about position on the field, like in the right spot on the field, in the right like plays, and getting beat in certain situations that it just didn't feel like you're being beat. It's like you gotta look at the coaching staff at that point and just say, we need a little bit of soul searching. So I think that this offseason and leading into next season, there's some scrutiny that needs to be put on that defensive staff to like make sure that these guys are ready. And right now, it definitely what Brandon was saying, and we were all saying about linebacker, like we needed to get some guys in the building that have some experience, especially in the middle of that defense. But I'm hoping that we can develop the players that we have a little bit better than what I've seen, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I just felt like we were a disappointment this year. And we just continue to say every week, it's like, oh, we're just a bad rushing defense. Like we're a bad rushing defense. And it's like, where's the fix to that? Like, where's the adjustments? Like, it's not like we don't have talent on that side of the ball. Like, there's no excuse in my opinion. I don't know. And that was the things that I was upset about. And I think, and last thing I'll say about JRP, which I didn't put this in the text, but I think he's going to be one of the larger what if stories from an athlete perspective that we have at UCF. I think that overall UCF fans who were really paying attention during his 2 years here will look at JRP as a very positive ambassador for the school and a great athlete that played for us as well. And I think that will be a lot more positive. But I think I think this season was just a big what if story. I mean, man, if he was just able to stay healthy, it would have been interesting to see what this team could have put together this season.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think he's a lot better than people gave him credit for, and I think he had a lot more catching up to do than people thought or gave him credit for as well. Because
my interactions with him, like, you know, at the baseball games in particular, just the time he took with my son. I mean, you talked about meeting Trey and with your son as well. I mean, these are special things. I mean, my son really likes to play baseball. He loves to play basketball as well. And JRP was his favorite baseball player, and it wasn't even close on who was second. And that was because we went to Fan Fest and before the season starts, and JRP, I mean, he like legitimately spends time with the fans. Like, he is a very good person. So I'm glad he came to UCF. I'm sad that I'm not going to be able to watch him in center field this year. I'll tell you that much. I wish him all the best. It's going to be, it's kind of sad that he's played his last game as an athlete for UCF, but I hope he's able to figure something out.
I don't think people appreciated him as much as he should have been. But then again, he also made some decisions that
he had some head scratching moments. There's no doubt about that.
And I don't mean that just in like where he threw the ball, but just like not protecting himself. So, you know, that's a guy that's a guy that goes a million miles an hour, and it's very hard to stop that train mentally for him, because he wants to go at 150% every single time. And sometimes you just can't go to 150 because you got to protect not just yourself, but the team. So
it's something I've never experienced before, but like he would step on the field and be the best athlete on the field 99% of the time. And that's something that is probably hard to like pull back the reins on when you're that athletic.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
All right, Ben, that was your tall take. Yep. It was a lot more demure than Trey's yelling at cloud segment. So definitely a change of pace, but Trey said he was all about positivity in the off season. So we'll see how long that takes. That being said, you know, next week we're excited. We're gonna take a deep dive into conference, into the Big 12 conference and UCF. But we do still have some hoops to talk about. We're gonna have Ben obviously talking about the conference. We're gonna have Chance McSpadden with us. Obviously, I'll talk a little hoops. Trey won't say anything. I don't know, maybe Josh will jump in here and there. And obviously, Alan, if he's back, by the way, hope his son feels a lot better. But you know, if he's back, he might get his old Central Florida future chops out and talk a little basketball. We challenged him to watch the games this year. So that being said, we're going to do a little segment called Hoopin' and Hollerin' with Ben Stout this week. And, you know, we haven't had a game recently, but we had a heck of a game against Bethune-Cookman. And it seems like all the pieces were coming together defensively, except for a few stretches there. And man, am I excited going into Big 12 play to see the fact that we can press pretty much an entire game, and the trap, you know, has worked really, really well for us. Obviously, you know, my big concerns still center around the offense and our ability to consistently produce offense. Sellers had a much better game This game. He showed with his 3-point stroke was starting to come back. He's getting a little bit more control. Obviously, it's Bethune-Cookman. However, he was just bricking stuff for a long time. So it felt like some of his confidence came back this game. What do you think? What were your observations?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Bethune-Cookman game was a little bit of it was a great. Well, first off, it was a great way to finish up the non-conference slate. Hopefully gaining some confidence going in to a really tough slate coming up in the Big 12. The entire conference is going to be tough, but man, we going through a murderer's row to start. Like first 6 games are just going to be insane. But that being said, 5 of our last 6 games in the non-conference, we held our opponents to 50 to in the 50s in points scored. That's a testament to the defense that you mentioned. It's also one of the things that has been on display and something that we've talked about a lot this season and even leading into it that we were hoping that we'd see, and we've seen a lot of examples of it, is the quality depth that we have as a team. And I think that helps when you're Johnny Dawkins and you want to be able to pressure the other team in a full court press. You want to be able to make sure that your defense is active the entire game and there is no let up from minute 1 to minute 40. Being able to throw so many players in the game off the bench and give those starters a blow, or even give the rotational players a blow, to be able to make sure that everybody is playing at the highest level possible, is just a really big luxury that has been probably the best thing about this team this season, in my opinion, is the quality depth that we've had. We've talked a lot about in years past about, hey, we've got a lot of dudes coming off the bench that are pretty good players, but like the lack of drop off that we see with these bench guys this season. It's great to get CJ Walker back in his second game of the season this year against Bethune-Cookman. I thought he finally started to figure out a little bit how to work his way into the offense. I think he just told himself what he should have told himself in the first game: just be a little bit more aggressive going towards the basket, try to get into the paint more. I think he's still trying to find himself a little bit, but a year and a half off of playing basketball at a D1 level is tough to, you're going to take a couple games to get back in the swing of things. So I'm really happy that he was able to get 2 games under his belt before we get to the Big 12 play. But so I was excited to see the defense, and I think that was an indicative of in the Bethune-Cookman game of what we have been doing this season as a team. And the other thing that I saw in the Bethune-Cookman game, which I just talked about, is that quality depth. We had 51. We scored 98 points, season high.
Couldn't get that hundo. That was something we put in our text.
I knew that. I told you, I knew that was going to happen as soon as the shot clock, got close to the game clock and they were still on defense. I was like, oh, sorry. I was telling my son, sorry, man, they're not going to get to it. But 51 bench points is just insane. To score 98 points as a team, but 51 of those comes from your bench. It shows you the type of quality that we have. And it's on both ends of the ball. Marcellus Avery he's quickly becoming my favorite player on this UCF basketball team. I just think he's so dynamic. He's got length. He can jump out of the gym. He can really put in the quality minutes on both ends of the court. And I think CJ is like a, kind of a clone of him. They really work well together. I think they're very similar players, but they each provide a little bit something different. So I'm excited to see CJ really get back into, get back into the swing of things here. But then when you got guys like Diallo coming off the bench too, I mean, just from a post front court player's perspective, the type of defense that he provides off the bench, rebounding, getting block shots. I think he's like number 1 in the conference in blocks per game. I'm not exactly sure, but he's certainly top 20 in the nation in that perspective. Overall, UCF's defense is like top 20 in a lot of in multiple categories.
Yeah, turnovers specifically. That if we can keep our turnovers down, and the way to do that I think is huge is that our transition offense, right? And a lot of point plays off the bench, because we're not playing a lot of half court offense. People look at it and they're like, oh, we're kind of struggling with it. But by doing that, one, that's indicative of the fact that we're getting a lot of turnovers and we're stopping ourselves from turning the ball over as much. So as long as we continue to play smart and transition, that should lead to a high number of turnovers for them and a low number of turnovers for us, which means that we should be on the winning end of some of these games.
Yeah, and we haven't always seen it in the teams in the past, and I think that's led to some frustrations from the fans, understandably so. But I mean, that's exactly what Dawkins wants to do. Coach Dawkins wants to play hard-nosed, half-court defense and play fast transition offense. I mean, to have your defense turn into fast transition buckets on the other end. And this team, with their ability, those two things that I talked about, the ability to pressure, but the quality depth allowing them to play full court press for longer than most teams, can sustain that, is kind of like how this team is through the transfer portal is just built in Johnny Dawkins mode. It's almost like it seemed like a sense of relief that he was able to just kind of mold this team with guys that are just built for his system and style of play, and the personalities seem to be meshing really well, which is exciting to see as well. And I mean, it's just, I hate to bring his name up again, but you got guys like Chichi Avery and CJ Walker that they may not start the rest of this season, but it's it doesn't matter. Diallo, I mean, Diallo's, a great player, and he could start for a lot of teams, even in this conference. He could start for a lot of teams, and he's coming off the bench, but it just seems he's supposed to, he's just that's where he fits in this for this team to be successful. And so I'm hoping that they can keep it up. I'm not giving any I'm not being naive about what we're up against, especially these next few games. But by the same token, I mean, I think this team is built in a way that could be successful and could surprise a lot of people. And then the last thing you see from the game against Bethune-Cookman, and you mentioned it, Roger, I mean, Jalen Sellers being able to kind of find his shot, especially from the outside. I mean, he was a 45% three-point shooter last year. And so, there's no doubt that he can fill it up at all three levels. And so hopefully he's able to kind of find his stride, and then all of a sudden, look out, see what happens here.
Well, it's funny because you even mentioned, bench players coming off the bench and playing better. I think DJ has actually been playing better off the bench than he has when he's been starting. So, a lot of our points have been coming from the bench, more so than what our starters have been. So, it's certainly interesting to see how that's coming together. And it reminds me a lot, if you don't remember Dawkins, he came up with an era of hard-nosed defense in the NBA, and he played for the Pistons. So that's a lot of his personality. and previously, what we've seen with the basketball team is they've started strong, had injuries throughout the season, and they were missing key players at the end. This year, it's kind of been the opposite, where we were missing players and we're sprinkling them back in as we lead up to conference.
Starting to get healthy at the right time. Yeah. I hope I'm a knock on wood as we say that.
Did I just jinx it because I said that? I hope not.
We'll blame you though, that's for sure.
Oh, I'm fine with that.
I will say, and I watch a good amount of basketball, and I relate to some of the NBA based things. So the Knicks just had a big trade, and Emmanuel quickly was one of the biggest parts of that trade. RJ Barrett, as we know when we played against him when he was at Duke, it is a shooter, but that really wasn't the person as a Knicks fan that I was really upset to see go, because he kind of didn't fit in that right mix. And I think that's really what we're seeing as the UCF bench kind of gels, if you will, because there are pieces like I wouldn't have thought 2 or 3 years ago CJ Walker's coming off the bench. But right now it just fits well, right? And I feel like this is one of those Memphis teams that was deep, mm-hmm. and would just throw another 5 at you, and can play similar but not the same exact level. So anyway, I love what we're seeing from the team, and I think it's great that not only like bench players and starters can kind of intermix. There are definitely some people who are not going to be coming off the bench, but it shows that depth might get us, if we're talking previously, Ben, you're saying 4 wins would be, great at the beginning of the season, earlier in the pod, right?
Maybe I don't know, man. Six still feels like a stretch to me, right?
It does, because right now there's 8 different top 25 teams. I mean, we play Houston twice and a few of those, right? But we're playing 8 teams in the top 25 in conference. So I agree with that, but it seems like there are more
four of our first 5 in conference are ranked teams, and Kansas State, could be ranked.
No one.
Yeah, it's a bubble team.
So I what I've seen, like, I know there are a lot of people who might not be on the Johnny Dawkins train, but I see this growth. This is what I was there when he was just hired in the initial get to know you phase of fans and coaches when they care about each other, like we were kind of talking about in football. and this is exactly what he said he wanted to do. Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, I think Coach Abe was there too. It might be that might be timing's off, but
no, Josh, you're right. I mean, what Johnny said from the opening press conference on was he wanted defense and he wanted transition. He wanted play press and turn that into offense, and we're finally getting there. That being said, I'm going to pick up something that you just said, and I'm going to pontificate on that in a minute, because if you've listened to Nightline, if you've listened to the Nighted Ones, if you've listened to any of the content that we put out, Nightline at Night, one of the things that I've said was, I don't think that Johnny is the guy, and I'll own it because I said it. I don't think that Johnny is the guy that will successfully transition us into the Big 12 to move us forward and be competitive. You just said a lot of things about Johnny Dawkins, and yes, I agree for this season. I still don't know if he's the guy. Nothing he's showed me. It's one thing I think our expectations are low, right? As they should be, because as I said last week, we are now in the SEC of basketball, right? Mm-hmm. If you look at a football comparison, this is that conference, right? And yes, we're seeing things out of conference that we like. And, it may transition into some success this year. But again, a lot of these guys are transfers and are 1 year or 2 year guys, right? Building a program is more than 1 year or 2 years. And I don't know if Johnny Dawkins, as much as I love him, and I've said this in the past, I've met his wife. They're amazing people. If I wanted to have my kids, like someone babysit my kids, it would be Johnny Dawkins and his wife. If I wanted, if I had a marginal basketball player as a child, and I wanted someone to coach them up, it would be Johnny Dawkins, right? And to teach them lessons of life. If I wanted someone that was going to be a McDonald's All-American, I'm not sure it's Johnny Dawkins that I want coaching my kid. And I'm just going to say that way, right? Yeah. and take it for what it's worth. But I still am not sold. I'm sold on Johnny Dawkins as a man. I'm sold on Johnny Dawkins as an AAC coach. I'm not sold on Johnny Dawkins as the Big 12 coach that's going to take us to be competitive in the Big 12 conference. Maybe not even be, I think he could get us NIT regularly. I'm not even sure in this conference that he could get us bubble team, despite the fact that the RPI will allow us to win fewer games and still not get there. I haven't seen something yet or the consistency yet that tells me that he's going to be that guy.
And I can see that. Let me just say this. I can see that point. But are we going to spend the money to change that? I think that's really the point.
No, but that's what I said too, was that he was going to be the guy that transitioned us for the first year or two, because we don't get the full Big 12 dollars.
Yeah.
Even make that decision if we're going to do that or not, and upgrade the basketball, because football still runs the show, right? Yeah. Until I think it's not even next year. It's the following year in that June that we actually get our full payments. Yeah. So it'll be a hot minute before we're even in a position to make that decision on basketball, because everything that we have has to go into football right now.
Yeah. 100%.
And I think it's, I've in those shows that you just mentioned, I mean, all the Nightline shows and the shows we've been on in the past, is to, I joke around that I feel like I'm a Johnny Dawkins apologist, but and for all those reasons that you just mentioned as to why, I mean, I've had many conversations with him. I think he is a great leader of men. I think he is a really good, these athletes coming to UCF and they're with Johnny Dawkins and his staff, by the way. I mean, not just him. They really understand that when the parents are sending these kids, to UCF, that they certainly realize that they're being sent to somebody who is a leader and is going to take care of their take care of them. And so on that note, I really like him as being a great representative of the school. Now, I also see and understand the frustrations at times. Now, man, I mean, besides the season that we made it to the NCAA tournament, and maybe a couple seasons before that when we made that great run in the NIT, it's just like we didn't quite have the health to sustain the style of play that he really likes to see. I mean, everybody likes to, forgets that magical run where that ended, on that, kind of horrible last minute at Duke. I mean, that magical run should have been year 2 of that. I mean, if Aubrey Dawkins doesn't get hurt prior to that season, if you don't go half the season without BJ and then the other half without Taco, that could have been a 2-year magical run where, hey, I mean, who knows? You still lose all those players the following year. You still lose Aubrey. You still lose BJ. You still lose Taco.
But it could be something to build off of. I mean, it certainly helps our basketball brand.
I say that to say, while I don't necessarily I'm not quite sure I agree with you on that. He's not the coach to bring us to the Big 12. I will say the opportunity is ahead of us that if this team is competitive in a lot of the games this season, and we are able to pull off about, somewhere between the numbers that we're saying would be looked at as a good building block to the future, somewhere around 6 or 7 conference wins, more than the 4 that we've been talking about, surprise a few teams, get a couple of big wins. I think there's no doubt he gets year 2 in Big 12 play. And that is something that we could then turn around into even more success. And then you can see what happens. Now, again, I'll also agree with Josh is that, and this is something that I've said for years, and Roger knows that I've said this for years. When we talk about is Dawkins the guy, I always say, well, who are you going to get? Who are you going to get to replace him? Who's the guy that's there to replace him? And so, I mean, I still think that the from an AD's perspective, I think that Danny White.
Did you almost say Danny
might have
White?
Liked what?
Oh, okay. You did say Danny White. Okay.
Yeah, I did say Danny White. I think Danny White might have paid a little bit more attention to basketball than our current AD. I think our current AD, while I really like Terry Mahajer, I don't know if necessarily he's fully like invested in the basketball program. And I mean that by headspace and time that he's putting towards it and all that, and really paying attention to the ins and outs of it, because he's a football guy. But that, that being said, I think that if we don't have, like, if we really don't look good in the Big 12 this year, I don't know if he's going to get year 2 or not. But I'm not really willing to have that conversation as part of like I'm looking forward to this Big 12 season, because we're sitting here and we're 8-3 or whatever we are, and
9-3.
We're 9-3. We went through the non-conference schedule in a way that outside of Stetson went about as we expected, and I would say probably better than we expected from a defensive standpoint. I mentioned the holding teams to under 60 points. I mean, we held a team to under 50. We have 44. I mean, we held what was it, Cal State Fullerton? We held them to 44 points this year. I mean, these are certain defensive numbers, but not just the defense, because that's kind of obvious. But there have been good stretches throughout the non-conference slate that we saw really good, like, ball movement on the offensive side of the ball, like even in the half court where they were moving without the ball very well. They were making the extra pass. I've seen that a lot over the last like 5-6 games. Is they might have might get it inside, get it back out, and get it to the next guy, but then all of a sudden they're making that one extra pass. They could have taken that open shot, but the one extra pass to the corner is a much better and a much more open shot, and we're seeing that a lot. Really solid, stretches of good ball movement on the offensive end, and if we can keep that up, we can keep teams a little bit on their heels, and you pair that with our strengths of our full court and half court defense. I think arguably our half court setup defense is better than our full court press defense.
Like when I say that, like it has been progressing better. Like you see the press, you see them press more, then they had the trap, but then they were letting guys out of the trap. Now the trap is causing turnovers. Now we're causing turnovers and inbounds passes. I see over probably a 5 or 6 game stretch a progression of that defensive strategy. So, as much as you see, I think half court, we had last year even a pretty good half court defense, but adding that pressure defense, I think is huge for us going forward.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been sitting there watching a UCF basketball game in these last however many non-conference games, and where I'm sitting there with my 10-year-old son who plays basketball, and and we're on defense as UCF, and I've like rewound the game a little bit to say, hold on, like, did you see how he rotated there? Like once that ball got swung, like, did you see like how he helped out his teammate? Like
defense.
I mean, these are the things that, like, when you're really paying attention to it, it's like, wow. I mean, these, and I'll say, Roger, like, and I know you'll agree with me on this, like that is coaching. Like you don't get just athletes to just do those kind of like you guys talk about it all the time, you know, on the football side. It's like those keys and those like reads that, like, that's the basketball version of it. It's like the way that they help each other out. Like, I mean, the way that they set up in a zone and like 2 passes into it, they switch to man, or vice versa. Like, and how they communicate to each other on the court. Like, all of that stuff just isn't, you can't athlete that. Like, that's got to come from smart players and coaches that prepare your team really well. And I think that's what I've been excited to see. I mean, I think Dawkins and his staff have done a good job of assembling these players, like assembling this team together, with the types of players that would really buy into the style of basketball that they want to play. And so far, versus some lesser competition and some good, a couple of really good competition, I mean, we've seen great flashes of them being able to compete at a really high level. And man, oh man, are they about to get some serious tests coming up? But well, I think that we're prepared for it.
I think the key that you said, definitely coaching this year, but I also think that this team has gelled a lot faster than most teams gel. Like, I think people are taking that for granted offensively and defensively, because normally a team, and we've seen it over and over and over and over again, we bring all these transfers in, they don't offensively or defensively gel this quickly. And, you know, what they're doing defensively in basketball is extremely complex. It's not basic basketball skills, whether you're talking about switching defenses or understanding when to do that, or, you know, adding the element of being able to press and have those half court defenses 100%.
Yeah, I remember just on that front, Roger. I mean, I remember 2 years ago when I called the Temple game, right, for ESPN Plus, and so it's me.
Just a little drop there.
Well, I haven't done it in a couple of years, so I guess it was a fond memory on my part. But I'm hoping they call me back. But honestly, where I'm sitting there during the shoot around, and I knew just from the game prep that like their guards they had bigger guards that loved to get downhill into the paint and then drive and kick. Like 75% of their offense was off the drive and kick. And I'm sitting there watching a shoot around with that team at the time, and like that's like all they talked about in shoot around was like how they structured their defense in order to like stop this. And then I sat there and I called the game, and I'm just watching a bunch of players that like aren't doing what they like stressed in the shoot around. And we have way more talent than Temple that year. But I mean, we're up by a point or two, and I say to Austin Lyon, I say, you know, we're like, you know, you gotta protect against the driving kick. We can't let what was the guy's name? I can't remember the guy's name. Is a double D name. It was like Darius or Dennis Drager or something like that. I forget his name. But we can't let him get downhill and drive and kick. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened on the last play of the game. And then we wound up losing that game to Temple, a game that we had no business even being close in the sense that we should have blown them out. And it's so, you know, from someone who doesn't see shoot around, like that was the one time I got to see it that year, like just because I wasn't able to get over there. Beyond that is, you know, you don't realize that they went over that time and time again, you know, hours before the game. But we did the type of players that actually executed when it mattered the most. And so,
well, that's the thing. Like with the football, when we're talking about that, we're not seeing the strategic aspects of it on how we're setting up the defense. On the basketball, you know, front, you're seeing that there's just not a lot of player execution. So I'm
hoping that changes this year. We've seen some great things in non-conference with this team, so it's a brand new team. We'll see.
All right. On that note, we're going to have a full show of basketball next week.
No doubt.
That I adore. Like, I know you talk about us in football, but I love basketball too. And I played basketball, and I played semi-pro basketball. And, you know, Ben, obviously you played collegiate basketball. So
I played in the Y, if that helps any.
Me too.
No, it doesn't. But that's okay. At least we'll admit it on the show. But that being said, like, and you know, obviously I've listened to you break down for many years, break down basketball for many years. You've heard me a little bit. You know, I've watched you on TV. You know what you're doing. We're gonna have Chance, another player, on. So it's gonna be a lot of fun to talk through some hoops and this inaugural Big 12 conference, you know, trip. And, you know, I think this team has surprised a lot of us. That being said, I'm excited to really dig into it deep next week. We were blessed with Brandon this week, and talking a little bit about football, and we'll talk more about football in the off season. I'm lucky because I get just as jazzed about basketball as I do about football. And, you know, I get to talk to you and Trey about football, and Josh, you know, he sprinkles in some things here and there, but you know, for me, it's a lot of fun, and I hope the fans get something out of it. And, you know, yeah, point taken, by the way, about the jargon, because Trey and I do get down the rabbit hole with jargon. Yeah, well, you know, hey, you know,
we try to limit it a little bit, but sometimes it's just like that's the only way to explain what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, for us, I think
you guys do a good job. I'm just giving you a little crap there.
No, we deserve it. I think maybe Trey and I need to do like an alphabet soup kind of segment where we talk about, okay, when we say this is what we mean. Exactly. So that, yeah, you know, how many people know what a boundary corner is, or being able to push somebody to a boundary, or, you know, what an you know, or even know something like a gap, right? Like, do you know what a gap, B gap is? You know, when we talk about that, or, you know, do we know what a pulling guard,
screen, and Iverson cuts, and yeah, all that back to
Sorry, I get so caught up in it. You guys make it so much fun, and it's like I get to talk like for me, you know, as a former player, obviously not D1 like you guys played, right? So I played different things, but, you know, as a former player, and then someone who was a fan and who's a student of the game, you know, it's fun for me to do those things and talk with you guys about it, because we do have experienced it at a different level than most people have. Mm-hmm. But I think your point's valid too, though, in that when we do those things, it's important for us to come back and say, hey, this is what we really mean. I say the same thing in my business stuff, you know, when we're doing a business podcast or anything else. It's, you know, using jargon is tough, but at the same time, it's just for me at least, and I think for Trey, and I think for you, we get excited about something, and you know, we start talking X's and O's, and we really need to kind of explain some of that. So, because there was a time I didn't know it either, right? Yep. So, years of experience, a lot of gray hair. So that being said, I'm excited about basketball next week. Trey's not, but I am. And
Trey's excited. He just doesn't know how much he wants to talk about it. That's it.
Yeah,
you're excited. I know you are.
Okay, so here's the challenge for this year. Can we convert Trey?
I watch basketball. I just, like, when you guys are explaining what you're looking for, I'm like, I don't know what you're looking for.
It's so funny because it was like
self-aware man.
Ben is like, I don't know what, like, when you guys are talking about certain things, like, I don't know what you're talking about in football. And Trey's like, I have no idea what y'all are talking about in basketball.
My brother, he's a big basketball guy. One time he said a DHO on this. I was like, what are you talking about? He was like, a dribble handoff. I was like, oh, that makes sense. But, like, I've never thought.
That's why you got to say, for podcast purposes, you just got to say dribble handoff. Don't say
exactly. He comes hard off the DHO. I'm like, what? I don't know what you're talking about. So.
B, what?
Yeah. So.
I was about to say, yeah.
Really quick though, and it's just I don't want to go too long on this because I know we got to wrap up. We've been going for a while, but the you mentioned earlier, Roger, that I think DJ comes off the bench, but he started every game except for one where he was injured and he came in the second half. But I think the reason why you said that, like he didn't start, right, is because we have the quality, and this is just one last thing on basketball. We have the quality depth where our starters, if they get off to a slow start, somebody like DJ it's happened with him a lot, where he can go to the bench and we have primary ball handlers that can just step in and fulfill that role, whether they came off the bench or just slid into a different role. Like Shamari Allen can play 3 different positions. DeMar Langford has been a great kind of glue guy for this team. We've got guys that can come off the bench or just slide into a different role if they were in the starting lineup, where a guy like Darius Johnson can just watch the game and unfold while he's sitting next to his dad or Kevin Norris or whoever it may be, and he's watching the game unfold in front of him for a few minutes, catch a breather, and then come back in and really perform at a high level. And that's what quality depth can do at any position, but at the point guard position where it's so important, I think that's what caused you to say that. He's been good coming off the bench, and it's he starts every game. He's our starting point guard, and he's not going to nobody else going to start over him.
And I should have rephrased that. You're right.
No, I'm not trying to correct you. I'm just trying to say I know why you said that. It's because we have such good quality depth that it's like we got a guy that is so good in Darius Johnson that's able to take a breather and take a minute and see what's really going on in the game, and then come back in and make a huge impact. I mean, and so that's what really excites me about what we can do moving forward, and I hope that we're able to stay healthy, and really compete hard in this conference.
Yeah.
Yep. I'm excited about that too. And you're right. That's what I meant by that.
Yeah.
And I should have said that differently. But what I meant by that was, a lot of times our starters have a slow start, or they are not seeing the floor and what the defense is trying to do, and we're pulling them out completely. I mean, we're pulling 3 or 4 players out at a time, not just 1 or 2.
Yeah.
Right.
Hockey
Completely resetting, going with a different look and lineup to attack that specific defense. They're getting a chance to sit on the bench and kind of get coached up and look at what the defense is throwing at them, and then they're being thrown back in, and then it's like a 0-0 game. So they're able to come in, and I will say this: never in all my years that I've watched UCF basketball have we ever had that. It's always been, we've had a few star players like Keith Clanton and Isaiah Sykes during that era, or AJ Ramsa, or whomever. We never had the opportunity to literally sit 3 to 4 starting players, have the backups come in, or have, consistently over the season, have the bench players outscore the starting players, give them the ability to sit and to come back, analyze, see what they're doing, and then pivot. We haven't had that, and that's not a hot take.
No, and to show the quality of players that this team was assembled with, watch those starters next time they come out of the game. Watch how active they are on the bench. Watch how they cheer on their teammates. They're talking to their coaches, or they're really engaged in the game. They don't get terribly away from the game once they're on the bench.
Unlike the football team.
Yeah, well, I know, Trey, you've been
that's
talking
what we've
about
been preaching
season.
about.
Yeah,
all
absolutely.
Season.
It's just watch how amped up they are on the bench, still contributing from those seats. I think that's a mark of the types of players that we brought in this season. I certainly want to give them 99% of the credit because that's who they are, and that's really exciting. I mean, once the game got out of hand at Bethune-Cookman, I mean, Jalen Sellers on the bench the last 4 minutes of the game. I know the game's out of hand at that point, but there was nobody cheering louder for his teammates than Jalen Sellers. He was all over the place. But you see that in the first half of the game, might get taken out because he had a silly foul or something like that. You see guys like Jalen, you see guys like Omar Payne and Shamari Allen. I mean, they're very active, whether they're in the game or on the bench. And I think that makes that makes the chemistry of a team really at an amped up level. And that makes the quality of the play on the court is really high level as well. So those little things that I see, man, it gets me excited to see what this team can do against some really tough competition coming up.
Yep. Wish we had them more than 1 year. All right, Josh.
Yeah.
Josh told me that he had a sometimes funny fact of the week. So I'm going to actually throw him on here. I mean, sorry guys at the length of this, but and I know you guys have been quiet, but I've this is, I enjoy it every week, but this group of people, I love talking sports with this group of people. I mean,
sorry, Alan.
Yeah, Alan, whatever. But no, I enjoy Alan too, especially because what Alan does for us is he brings that stats mentality that I used to bring to Nightline. He brings it here, so I don't have to, which is amazing.
He's amazing.
And he did all the show prep for this show. So guys,
true.
Josh says that in jest.
Hero.
But that's the real hero.
We miss you, Alan.
We had Brandon who pulled Marshall out of the top of his head as the first Conference USA home basketball game, and he was right. So I mean, man, it's just amazing. So I do have a pretty interesting fun fact. We're going to do an over under. I think it's interesting. An over and under on this statement. Okay, what do you think? Over or under? There are estimated to be 30 women in positions of leadership on men's basketball coaching staffs. Do you think it's over 30 or under 30?
In college?
In college men's basketball.
Under.
I'd say over, just because there's so many college teams.
You're saying men's basketball, right?
Men's basketball.
I'm going to say
that would be there's 330, so that would be almost 10% of it. I'm going to say under.
All right. Well, the reason we picked that fact, and by we, I mean me, is because one such woman exists on the K-State's basketball team. And the answer is over. They're estimated, and this is by Kansas State's own bio.
Bro, estimated? You're not even giving us real. This is sometimes funny fact of the week, not estimated.
This is from Kansas State's own bio and their state and her own bio, and they are staying estimate. So I wanted to couch it a little bit. There are 31 such women.
Better than estimated. Come on, bro.
Hey, listen. I'm going from sources, and the sources says estimated. There are 31 women in such positions, and K-State's Bailey Bachamp is one of them. She is their director of men's basketball operations. Okay. And per her bio, she's one of an estimated 31 women in positions of leadership, meaning assistant coach, director of operations, assistant director of operations, recruiting coordinator, chief of staff, and or assistant to the head coach on men's basketball coaching staffs in Division I.
Awesome. All right. That is something that I would have never even thought to look up. So definitely I thought about women's hoops a lot because there's a lot of very successful women's basketball coaches in the women's side of things, but it's interesting to see that. And to Ben's point, almost 10% in the sport. So I'd
be interested to know how many of them are assistant coaches, though. I mean, director of basketball operations is an important position on a college basketball team, but I'd be interested to see how many women are assistant coaches, like, a Becky Hammond type that is just like, she's the best example, obviously, on the pro level. But it'd be interesting to see that fact, because that would be, quite interesting if that number was over 20, or so, or something like that. But yeah, that's still a fascinating stat for sure.
All right, so let's on that note, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the UCF athletics update. Josh, do you have that for us this week?
I will if I get to the show notes. Yeah, the athletics update. We really have been, and I'm trying to get that number. There was one in 2019. There was one lone female coach in D1 men's hoops, up in University of Maine, who we played this year. So
how about that?
That's 4-year-old information, but I'll try to dig a little bit deeper into that too, because I agree with you. That
would be a perfect fact for next week's show.
Okay, yeah, there you go. Look at what you're trying to do to me. So, for UCF athletics, for updates. So, quick updates on our other sports. We have the UCF women's hoops. They played in their first Big 12 game in Norman in Oklahoma, and they started on an 11-0 run, and Oklahoma adjusted during the second quarter and then kind of ran away with it at the end. UCF loses to Oklahoma 69-52. The women's team are playing Oklahoma State next. It'll be at home on January 3rd at 6 p.m. You might be hearing this after that game. I hope not. But that is the next women's home game, and we have nothing for a couple of weeks until track and field starts up. So pretty much all UCF sports is basketball, men's and women's.
Yeah, and I'll say this because we neglected it while we were so excited about talking about men's basketball there for a while. We do play Kent State away on Saturday. Kansas State. Wow, did I just say Kent State?
I think you did say Kent State
away.
Maybe you said K-State. We'll see.
I was trying to say K-State, but ended up with Kent State somehow. So I'm correcting myself. So Kansas State away this Saturday. The Oklahoma game, it actually was surprising to me. I was expecting us. Now our offense has been a little streaky, and we played a lot of close games because of that. Oklahoma, it was a tight game into the third quarter, because remember, for women's games, they do the full 4 quarters. But they definitely pulled away in the fourth. So it'll be interesting to see how the ladies react. And as you know, we've got some pretty heavy hitters in the conference in women's basketball as well, with teams like Baylor, in there. And Oklahoma was kind of a middling team, so it was a little surprising to me, but it may be first game jitters. So keep watching them, keep supporting them, etc. And Josh, I know that we talked when we pre-gamed a little bit, that you had an update for us on the Big 12 Bowl recap. So why don't you go ahead and let us know what happened for the Big 12?
Well, there was only one game that we need to talk about, and that was the Texas versus Washington game. And because I wanted to watch some sports, I watched almost all of that entire game. And
almost. You missed the most exciting parts of it, because I watched the whole game. It was like, oh my goodness, at the end.
No, I watched it to the end,
and then everything else that happened.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, it's no. I watched it to the end. I saw it through the running back who I don't know if he's going to be. I'm assuming he won't be back playing in the national championship game. I think it was Johnson who got injured with like 40 some odd seconds left, and because the injury gave them so much time. But Texas, in their final game as a Big 12 member, couldn't pull it out. They actually didn't lead the entire game and lost to Washington in the conference CFP semifinals. I believe it was 37-31. But Washington is a solid team, and Texas played them pretty darn well too. I mean, they were playing from behind most of the game, but they held their own. I think that was probably. I watched most of the Michigan Alabama game 2. I actually thought the Texas Washington game was actually better.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Than the first game. And it's, I don't know, it's Washington versus Michigan is going to be a pretty cool championship. I'm excited to see that. But for the Big 12, last Big 12 bowl team to play was Texas, and they're not playing anymore.
Yeah. That game was certainly interesting because I thought it was over. And quite frankly, I think I even made the comment in our text thread about Michigan being done and DOA, and they turned it around in the fourth quarter, which really surprised me. So I will say this is the first year that I've watched the playoff games. First year. And both of them were pretty good. So
yeah.
It certainly was fun. Texas, I think, killed itself with penalties, took themselves out of rhythm, took themselves out of possessions, put Washington in good, unique possessions. And, I made that joke about CJ Baxter earlier, but that was kind of in tongue in cheek because I'm still mad he didn't commit here. He actually, he's one of those guys that I could see coming back here if he ever gets in a position where he wants to transfer, and was on a lot of UCF local media content. That being said, with media content on Final Thoughts, this episode is our longest yet, 2 hours and 45 minutes. And that's my fault. But I'm not apologizing because I had a great time. And first and foremost, as much as we love you guys listening to what we're talking about, I think it's quality content, and it's something that I enjoy doing with a lot of great people in the UCF community. So I just wanted to say thank you to Brandon and Trey and Ben and Josh, and obviously not Alan because he didn't show up, and Noah because he's in Navarre. Like, he's actually literally 35 minutes away from me. But we'll be excited to welcome them back. Next week, we're going to talk a lot about hoops. I'm excited about that and the conference play. And, just really proud of where UCF is. As much of a letdown as Georgia Tech was. I called it a tech-tastrophe last week. But at the end of the day, UCF is now a power conference. We're not, other than that one comment this week from that yokel, from the Colin Coward show or whatever show that was. UCF has made a name for itself. What you heard tonight was the journey, and no matter what, we're P4 now. Trey contributed to that. Ben contributed to that. Brandon contributed to that. I'd like to think I had a little bit of that. But at the end of the day, what it boils down to is this: we've made it. This is our next stepping stone, and we're going to grow, and we're going to continue to push. And there'll be a day where, and I think the day is now, where we put ourselves in a position in the best conference that we possibly can in the Big 12 to position ourselves for the next 7 or 8 years, because there's going to be a lot of volatility in college athletics. And I think we're in a good spot, and I think we're going to keep pushing, and I think we'll do well. And, thank you to every fan, thank you to every athlete, thank you to every administrator who's gotten us where we are today. And I look forward to the journey going forward, and I hope you take it with us on this crazy podcast. So thank you all. Remember to like, subscribe, follow, join us, and, appreciate your support, and go Knights. And
charge on.
So what I'm thinking is I'm going to have a new slogan every time I open up the show, and maybe we can figure out.
You never open up the show. You always end up last. Come on.
But I'm always at the beginning of the show.